Marcus Bolano ruled southern Italy with blood and fear, but the night his pregnant wife laid divorce papers on his desk, he laughed. What the most dangerous man in the region didn't know was that Isabella Bolano wasn't leaving. She was declaring war. And unlike her husband, she never fought battles she hadn't already won. If you want to discover how the woman everyone dismissed destroyed an empire from the inside, stay until the end. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The mansion sat like a crown of shadows on the hillside, its iron gates and limestone walls a monument to power that had been built on bones and silence. Inside, the halls stretched wide and cold, decorated with art that cost more than most men earned in lifetimes, and furniture that spoke of wealth but never warmth. It was a beautiful prison, and Isabella Bolano had learned every corner of it. She stood now in the study, her hand resting lightly on the swell of her belly, 6 months round with the child everyone assumed would be an heir. The room smelled of leather and cigars, of expensive whiskey and older secrets. The desk before her was mahogany, imported, massive. On it lay a folder, cream-colored and neat, tied with a simple ribbon. Divorce papers. Isabella's face was calm. She had learned long ago that expression was currency, and she spent hers carefully. Her dark hair was pulled back simply, her dress modest and well-fitted, nothing that screamed for attention. She had never been the type of woman men noticed at first glance. Marcus had told her that once, early in their marriage, when he still pretended his words were compliments. "You're not like the others," he'd said. "You don't need to be seen." What he'd meant was that she wasn't beautiful enough to be dangerous. What he'd failed to understand was that invisibility was the most dangerous thing a woman could cultivate. The sound of tires on gravel drew her attention to the window. Headlights swept across the courtyard, bright and arrogant. Marcus was home. Isabella didn't move. She simply waited, her hands folded across the papers, her breathing slow and even. She had been waiting for this moment for months, longer if she was honest, years perhaps, since the first time he'd come home smelling like someone else, since the first time he'd looked through her instead of at her, since she'd realized that the man she'd married saw her as decoration, a necessity for legitimacy, a womb to carry his legacy, and nothing more. The front door slammed open with the kind of noise that came from a man who'd never had to worry about disturbing anyone. Footsteps echoed through the hall, heavy and confident. Marcus Bolano walked like he owned the world because in many ways he did. Southern Italy bent to his will. Politicians took his calls, rivals disappeared. His name alone could empty a room or fill a grave. He appeared in the doorway of the study, and the smell hit her immediately. Perfume. Expensive, floral, cloying. Not hers. Never hers. Marcus was a handsome man in the way that power made men handsome. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark eyes that could switch from charm to cruelty in a heartbeat. His suit was custom, his watch worth more than a car. He loosened his tie as he stepped inside, not bothering to close the door behind him. "You're still awake," he said, his voice carrying that lazy amusement he always used when he thought he was in control. "Didn't expect that." "I was waiting for you," Isabella replied. Her voice was quiet, steady, the kind of tone that didn't demand attention but somehow commanded it anyway. Marcus's eyes flicked to the folder on the desk. He paused, just for a second, then smiled. It was the smile of a predator who'd spotted prey too small to bother with, but might toy with anyway. "What's this?" He crossed the room with deliberate slowness, picked up the folder, and opened it. His eyes scanned the first page, then the second. The smile widened. "Divorce papers?" "Yes," he laughed. It was a deep, rolling sound, genuine in its disbelief. "You're joking." "I'm not." Marcus dropped the folder back onto the desk, leaning against the edge as he studied her with something between amusement and contempt. "Isabella, sweetheart, you can't divorce me." "I can. And I am." "No." He shook his head, still smiling. "You don't understand how this works. You don't get to leave. Not you. Not while you're carrying my child." "Our child," she corrected softly. "Semantics." He waved a hand dismissively. "The point is, you think you can just walk out? Go where? Do what? You have nothing without me. No money, no protection, no life. You'd be dead in a week." Isabella met his eyes without flinching. I'm aware of the risks. Then why the theater? Marcus gestured at the papers. What's the point of this? To get my attention? To make me feel guilty? He laughed again. Because if that's the game, you've already lost. I don't do guilt. I know you don't. Then what do you want? I want you to sign them. The amusement in his expression began to curdle into something sharper. You're serious. I've never been more serious about anything in my life. Marcus straightened, his posture shifting from relaxed to predatory. He stepped closer, looming over her, using his size the way he always did when he wanted to intimidate. You think you're the first woman to try this? To think she could threaten me into giving a damn? You're not special, Isabella. You're convenient. You're quiet. You stay out of the way. That's why I married you. But don't mistake that for power. I'm not threatening you, Marcus. Isabella's voice remained calm, almost gentle. I'm informing you. Of what? That this marriage is over, whether you sign or not. He stared at her, and for the first time something flickered in his eyes that wasn't amusement or contempt. It was confusion. He didn't understand her. That, Isabella realized, was exactly where she needed him. Marcus grabbed the folder again, flipping through the pages with more force than necessary. Fine. You want to play this game? Let's play. He pulled a pen from the desk drawer, clicked it open, and scrawled his signature across the first page without reading a single line. Then the second. Then the third. Isabella watched in silence. She didn't stop him. She didn't speak. She simply observed as he signed away things he didn't even realize he was signing away. When he finished, he tossed the pen onto the desk with a clatter. There. Happy now? Not yet. His eyes narrowed. What's that supposed to mean? It means, Isabella said quietly, that you just signed over legal guardianship of protected assets to me and our unborn child. It means you transferred majority share control of 3 shell companies directly into a trust you can't access. It means you just gave me everything I need to survive without you. The room went silent. Marcus stared at her, his expression frozen somewhere between disbelief and dawning rage. What? You didn't read them, Isabella continued, her tone almost sympathetic. You never do. You sign things because you assume everyone around you is too afraid to cross you. But I'm not everyone, Marcus, and I'm not afraid anymore. You... His voice cracked, fury flooding into the space where arrogance had been. You set me up. I protected myself. There's a difference. Marcus lunged forward, his hand slamming down on the desk so hard the wood groaned. You think you can steal from me? You think you can take what's mine and walk away? I didn't steal anything, Isabella said calmly. You gave it to me, legally, willingly. I'll kill you. No, you won't. You don't think I will? I think, Isabella said, meeting his eyes without a trace of fear, that if you kill me, you lose everything. The assets revert to a secondary trust managed by people you don't control. The moment I die, your empire starts bleeding, and you're smart enough to know that blood doesn't stop once it starts. Marcus's jaw clenched, his hands curled into fists. For a long moment, he looked like a man on the edge of violence, the kind of violence that had built his reputation and crushed his enemies. But he didn't move, because she was right. You think you've won, he said finally, his voice low and dangerous. You think you're clever, but you have no idea what you've just started. I know exactly what I've started, Isabella replied. A war. And unlike you, I don't fight wars I haven't already planned to win. Marcus stared at her, and in that moment something shifted. He saw her, really saw her. Not the quiet wife who stayed in the background, not the decoration he'd married for legitimacy, but the woman who had been watching, learning, waiting for the exact moment to strike. Who are you? He asked, almost to himself. Isabella smiled. It was a small, sad smile, the kind that carried years of silence and patience and pain. I'm the woman you should have paid attention to. Marcus turned and walked out of the room without another word. The sound of his footsteps echoed down the hall, fading into the depths of the mansion. Isabella stood alone in the study, her hand resting on her belly, her heart steady. She had just declared war on the most dangerous man in southern Italy, and she had done it so quietly he hadn't even realized it was happening. The days that followed were strange in their stillness. Marcus didn't rage. He didn't threaten. He simply vanished into his world of meetings and phone calls and late nights that smelled like expensive perfume and cheaper lies. Isabella moved through the mansion like a ghost, present but unseen, her routine unchanged. She woke early. She took her vitamins. She walked the gardens. She ate her meals alone. To anyone watching, she was exactly what she had always been, the quiet, pregnant wife of a powerful man. But beneath that surface, Isabella was working. She had spent years preparing for this moment, years watching Marcus's operation from the inside, learning the names that mattered, the structures that held his empire together, the weaknesses he didn't know existed. She had been invisible, and invisibility had given her access to everything. Marcus kept his secrets poorly. He assumed no one was watching. He assumed his wife was too simple, too sheltered, too dependent to understand the world he lived in. He'd underestimated her from the beginning, and that underestimation had cost him. The shell companies she'd secured control over weren't small. They were the circulatory system of his operation, laundering money, moving assets, keeping the whole machine running. With her name on the legal documents, she could freeze accounts, redirect funds, make things disappear. She wouldn't. Not yet. But the threat was there, a knife held gently at his throat. She had also been watching Valeria Cruz. Valeria was the kind of woman men like Marcus always fell for. Beautiful in an obvious way, with long legs and perfect hair, and a smile that promised things she never intended to deliver. She was a model, or at least that's what she called herself. In reality, she was something far more dangerous. Isabella had noticed Valeria months ago, long before Marcus had started coming home smelling like her perfume. She'd seen the way Valeria moved through certain circles, always close to power, but never quite holding it. She'd tracked the connections, followed the threads, and eventually, she'd found the truth. Valeria Cruz wasn't Marcus's mistress by accident. She was an infiltration point, a plant, someone sent by a rival syndicate to get close to Marcus, to learn his weaknesses, to find the cracks in his armor. And Marcus, arrogant and careless, had let her in. Isabella had considered telling him. For a moment, she'd thought about being the loyal wife, the one who saved him from his own stupidity. But then she'd realized something crucial. Marcus wouldn't listen. He'd dismiss her. He'd tell her she was paranoid, jealous, imagining things. He'd choose to believe Valeria's lies over Isabella's truth because Valeria was beautiful and Isabella was not. So instead, Isabella had decided to let it play out. She would watch. She would wait. And when the moment was right, she would use the information to her advantage. That moment came sooner than she expected. It was a Tuesday evening when Marcus finally acknowledged her existence again. He found her in the sitting room, reading a book with one hand while the other rested on her belly. The baby had started kicking recently, small flutters that reminded her she wasn't alone. "We need to talk," Marcus said, his tone clipped. Isabella looked up, her expression neutral. "About what?" "About your little stunt with the papers." "It wasn't a stunt, it was a legal transaction." Marcus's jaw tightened. "I had my lawyers look at it. They say it's binding." "It is." "They also say you were smart about it, covered every angle, made it airtight." He paused, his eyes dark. "When did you become so clever?" "I've always been clever," Isabella said quietly. "You just never noticed." Marcus crossed the room and sat down across from her, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "So what now? You think you can blackmail me? Use those assets to control me?" "I don't want to control you, Marcus. I never did." "Then what do you want?" Isabella closed her book and set it aside, meeting his eyes with the same calm she always carried. "I want you to understand something. I want you to see what you've been too blind to notice." "And what's that?" "That the woman you've been sleeping with is not who you think she is." Marcus's expression flickered just for a second. "Valeria?" "Yes." "What about her?" Isabella reached beside her chair and pulled out a folder. Not the divorce papers this time. Something else. She handed it to Marcus without a word. He opened it, his eyes scanning the contents. Bank statements, phone records, photographs, documents that traced Valeria Cruz's connections back to the Rossi family, one of Marcus's oldest rivals. Evidence of meetings, payments, communications. Marcus's face went pale. "She's been feeding them information for months," Isabella said quietly. "Everything you've told her, every weakness you've shown, Every plan you've shared, it's all gone back to them. They're building a case against you, legal and otherwise. Marcus looked up, his expression a mix of rage and disbelief. How long have you known? Long enough? And you didn't tell me? Would you have believed me? Isabella asked. If I'd come to you 2 months ago and said your mistress was a spy, would you have listened? Or would you have told me I was jealous and paranoid? Marcus didn't answer. He didn't need to. They both knew the truth. She's going to destroy you, Isabella continued. Not today, not tomorrow, but soon. She's patient, she's smart, and she's very good at what she does. Why are you telling me this now? Because, Isabella said, her voice steady, I need you to understand that I'm not your enemy. I never was. But I'm not going to stand by and watch you burn everything to the ground because you were too arrogant to see the truth. Marcus stared at her, and for the first time since she'd known him, he looked genuinely shaken. What do you want me to do? I want you to end it, quietly, cleanly, before she has a chance to finish what she started. And if I do? Then maybe, Isabella said softly, we can figure out what comes next. Marcus stood, clutching the folder in one hand. He looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable in his eyes. You're not what I thought you were. No, Isabella agreed. I'm not. He left the room without another word, and Isabella sat alone in the silence, her hand resting on her belly. She had just given Marcus the information he needed to save himself. But she hadn't done it for him. She'd done it because the Rossi family was a threat to her child, and Isabella Belano protected what was hers. Always. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of tension and whispers. Marcus moved against Valeria with the same ruthlessness he'd always employed against his enemies. She disappeared one night, quietly and without fuss, and no one asked questions. In Marcus's world, people disappeared all the time. Isabella didn't ask what happened to her. She didn't need to know. What mattered was that the immediate threat was gone. Marcus's empire was secure, at least for now. And Isabella had proven her value in a way he couldn't ignore. But the peace didn't last. It never did. The attack came from a direction Isabella hadn't anticipated. Not violence, not guns or knives or the usual tools of Marcus's world. It came in the form of a rumor, whispered at first in the dark corners of the organization, then louder, then impossible to ignore. The baby wasn't Marcus's. Isabella first heard it from Maria, the housekeeper who'd worked in the mansion for years. Maria was loyal, discreet, and genuinely kind. She came to Isabella's room one morning with tea and the kind of expression that said she didn't want to deliver the news she was carrying. Signora, Maria said quietly, setting the tray down, I need to tell you something. Isabella looked up from the book she'd been reading. What is it? There are people talking, saying things. What kind of things? Maria hesitated, her hands twisting together. They're saying the baby isn't Signore Belano's, that you were unfaithful. Isabella's heart went cold. Not with fear, with clarity. Who's saying this? I don't know where it started, but it's spreading. Some of the men, they're asking questions, and Signore Belano, he's heard it too. Isabella set her book aside slowly, her mind already racing through possibilities. This wasn't random gossip. This was strategic. Someone had started this rumor deliberately, knowing exactly how much damage it would do. Thank you, Maria, Isabella said quietly. You can go. Maria left, closing the door behind her, and Isabella sat alone in the silence. She pressed her hand to her belly, feeling the baby move beneath her palm. Whoever had started this rumor had made a critical mistake. They'd assumed Isabella would panic, that she'd run or beg or break. They didn't know her at all. Marcus confronted her that evening. He didn't yell. He didn't rage. He simply walked into her room and stood there, his face carved from stone. Is it true? He asked. Isabella looked up at him from where she sat by the window. Is what true? Don't play games with me, Isabella. You know what I'm talking about. Say it, she said calmly. If you're going to accuse me of something, have the courage to say it out loud. Marcus's hands clenched into fists. They're saying the baby isn't mine. And you believe them? I don't know what to believe anymore. Isabella stood slowly, her movements deliberate. She crossed the room until she was standing directly in front of him, close enough to see the doubt and anger warring in his eyes. "You think I would betray you?" she asked quietly. "I think," Marcus said, his voice rough, "that I don't know who you are anymore." "You never knew who I was," Isabella replied. "That's the problem. You married me because I was quiet and convenient. You kept me around because I didn't make demands. But you never actually looked at me. You never saw me. So now when someone tells you a lie about me, you don't know if it's true or not because you don't know me well enough to tell the difference." Marcus flinched, just slightly. "That's not—" "It is," Isabella interrupted. "And that's fine. I stopped expecting you to see me a long time ago. But if you're going to accuse me of infidelity, if you're going to question whether this child is yours, then I need you to understand something." "What?" "I have never," Isabella said, her voice steady and cold, "betrayed you. Not once. Not in any way. I have been faithful to you even when you didn't deserve it. Even when you came home smelling like other women. Even when you treated me like furniture. I stayed. I endured. And I protected you from threats you didn't even know existed." Marcus stared at her, his expression cracking. "Then why—" "Because someone wants to destroy you," Isabella said. "And they know the fastest way to do that is to make you destroy me first. They know you're arrogant enough to believe a rumor over the truth. They know you'll throw me away without a second thought. And once I'm gone, once you've killed the only person who's been protecting your empire from the inside, they'll move in and take everything." "Who?" Marcus demanded. "Who's behind this?" "I don't know yet," Isabella admitted. "But I'll find out. Because unlike you, I don't react without thinking. I don't burn bridges before I know where they lead. And I don't let my pride make me stupid." The silence that followed was thick and heavy. Marcus looked at her, really looked at her, and for the second time in their marriage, he seemed to see someone he didn't recognize. "I need proof," he said finally. "Of what? My fidelity? My loyalty?" Isabella shook her head. "I can't prove a negative, Marcus. I can't prove I didn't do something. All I can do is tell you the truth and let you decide whether you're strong enough to believe it." Marcus turned away, his shoulders tight with tension. "There's a DNA test. A report. Someone sent it to me. It says the baby isn't mine." Isabella's blood went ice cold, not because she feared the results, but because she understood what this meant. "Show me," she said. Marcus pulled a folded paper from his jacket and handed it to her. Isabella opened it, her eyes scanning the official-looking letterhead, the technical jargon, the final conclusion printed in bold letters. Probability of paternity, 0%. It was a forgery. It had to be. But it was a good one. Professional. Convincing. "This is fake," Isabella said quietly. "How do you know?" "Because I know the truth. And because whoever made this knew exactly what they were doing." She looked up at Marcus. "Do another test. A real one. Use a lab you trust, not one that was suggested to you. Do it yourself. And then you'll know." "And if it comes back the same?" Isabella met his eyes without flinching. "It won't. But if you need to do it to believe me, then do it. I'm not afraid of the truth." Marcus took the paper back, his expression unreadable. "I'll arrange it." "Good." He left without another word, and Isabella sank back into her chair, her hands trembling slightly. Not with fear, with rage. Someone had just tried to destroy her with a lie, and when she found out who, she would make sure they regretted it. The real DNA test took 3 days. 3 days during which Isabella moved through the mansion like a woman on trial, aware that everyone was watching, waiting, judging. The staff whispered. Marcus's men looked at her with suspicion. Even Maria seemed uncertain, though she tried to hide it. Isabella endured it all with the same quiet dignity she'd always carried. She didn't defend herself. She didn't plead. She simply waited for the truth to speak for itself. When the results came back, Marcus brought them to her himself. He walked into the sitting room where she was reading, his face carefully blank. "The test came back," he said. Isabella set her book aside. "And?" Marcus handed her the paper. Isabella took it, her hand steady, and read the conclusion. Probability of paternity, 99.97%. She looked up at Marcus, her expression calm. Satisfied? I... Marcus trailed off, something that might have been shame crossing his face. I'm sorry. Are you? I should have trusted you. Yes, Isabella agreed. You should have, but you didn't, because trusting me would have required knowing me, and you never bothered to do that. Marcus flinched. Isabella, who gave you the fake report? She interrupted. I don't know. It was delivered anonymously. That's convenient. I'll find out who... No, Isabella said sharply. You won't. You'll make it worse. You'll go charging in with guns and rage, and you'll play right into their hands. This is chess, Marcus, not war, and you're terrible at chess. Then what do you suggest? Isabella stood, her hand resting on her belly. I suggest you let me handle it, because unlike you, I know how to fight battles quietly. Marcus stared at her, and slowly, reluctantly, he nodded. All right. Good. Isabella walked past him toward the door, then paused. And Marcus? Yes? The next time someone tries to turn you against me, remember this moment. Remember that I was right, and you were wrong. And ask yourself whether you can afford to keep underestimating me. She left him standing alone in the sitting room, and as she walked down the hall, she felt the baby kick inside her. Strong, persistent, alive. Isabella smiled. The war was far from over, but she'd just won another battle, and she was only getting started. Isabella didn't sleep that night. She sat by the window of her room, watching the moonlight paint silver across the gardens, her mind turning over every possibility, every thread, every potential enemy. The forged DNA report hadn't been random malice. It had been precise, calculated, designed to hit Marcus exactly where he was weakest. His pride, his paranoia, his need to control everything around him. Whoever was behind this understood him, perhaps better than Isabella did, and that made them exceptionally dangerous. By dawn, she had narrowed the possibilities to 3 factions. The Rossi family, still angry about Valeria's exposure and disappearance. The De Luca syndicate, longtime rivals who'd been testing Marcus's borders for months. Or someone inside Marcus's own organization, someone close enough to know the dynamics of their marriage. Someone patient enough to plant seeds of doubt and watch them grow. The third option worried her most. Maria brought breakfast at 7, her eyes puffy and red-rimmed. She set the tray down without meeting Isabella's gaze, and Isabella caught her wrist gently before she could leave. Maria, she said quietly, look at me. The older woman's eyes lifted, filled with guilt and uncertainty. You've been with this family for how long? Isabella asked. 15 years, Signora. And in those 15 years, have I ever given you reason to doubt my character? Maria's face crumpled. No, never. I'm so sorry. I should never have... It's all right, Isabella interrupted gently. Fear makes people question things they know to be true. But I need you to trust me now, Maria. Can you do that? Yes, Signora, of course. Good, because I need your help. Isabella released her wrist and sat back. I need to know who's been asking questions about me. Who's been spreading the rumors? I need names, times, anything you can remember. Maria nodded quickly, relief flooding her features at being given a purpose. There's one man, Carlo Messina. He's been the loudest, asking everyone if they've seen you with anyone, if you've had visitors, if you've been sneaking around. Isabella filed the name away. Carlo Messina, one of Marcus's lieutenants, mid-level, ambitious, always hovering just outside the inner circle. Anyone else? Some of the younger men, but they were just repeating what Carlo said. He's the one who started it. I'm sure of it. Thank you, Maria. You've been very helpful. After Maria left, Isabella sat with her coffee growing cold, thinking. Carlo Messina. It could be simple ambition, a man trying to undermine Marcus by destroying his wife's credibility. Or it could be something more. Someone using Carlo as a mouthpiece, feeding him information, directing his actions. She needed more information, and she knew exactly where to get it. The mansion had many rooms that Marcus assumed were private. His office, his study, the locked wing where he conducted business he didn't want witnesses to. But Marcus had always underestimated how much access a wife had, how many keys existed, how many people were willing to look the other way when the Signora walked past. Isabella had been mapping his spaces for years. That afternoon, while Marcus was out dealing with a shipment dispute at the docks, Isabella made her way to his private office. The lock was simple. She'd watched him open it 100 times, had memorized the combination of the old-fashioned tumbler mechanism. Inside, the room smelled like cigar smoke and expensive cologne, everything neat and organized in that obsessive way Marcus maintained when he wanted to feel in control. She went straight to the filing cabinet behind his desk. Marcus kept most of his important records digitally now, but he was old-fashioned enough to maintain physical backups of anything he considered truly valuable: personnel files, financial records, communications logs. Isabella found Carlo Messina's file in the M section, pulled it out, and began reading. Carlo was 34, originally from Naples, had been with the organization for 6 years, competent but not exceptional. No major infractions, but no significant achievements either. He'd been passed over for promotion twice in the last year, both times in favor of men with less seniority but more strategic value. That was motive, resentment, the kind that festered. But as Isabella dug deeper, she found something else. Bank deposits. Small, irregular, coming from an account she didn't recognize. Not enough to raise immediate red flags, but enough to suggest someone was supplementing Carlo's income. Isabella photographed the relevant pages with her phone, careful to maintain the exact order of the documents. Then she kept searching. In the back of another drawer, she found communications logs from the past 3 months. Marcus kept records of every phone call, every meeting, every interaction his key people had. Paranoia made for excellent documentation. She found Carlo's name appearing repeatedly in connection with phone calls to an unlisted number. Always brief, always at odd hours, never more than a minute or two. Isabella copied the number, replaced everything exactly as she'd found it, and left the office as silently as she'd entered. Back in her room, she made a call to the one person in Marcus's organization she trusted completely. Antonio Greco was 63, had been with the family since before Marcus was born, and had watched Isabella grow from a nervous bride into something he didn't quite have words for. He answered on the second ring. "Signora," he said, his voice warm and gravelly. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "I need information, Antonio." Quietly. There was a pause. "What kind of information?" Isabella gave him the unlisted number. "I need to know who this belongs to, and I need to know who's been paying Carlo Messina under the table." Another pause, longer this time. "You're investigating one of our own?" "I'm protecting my family," Isabella corrected. "There's a difference." Antonio sighed. "This is dangerous territory, Signora. I know. That's why I'm calling you instead of doing it myself. Give me 2 hours." "Thank you, Antonio." She hung up and sat back, her hand resting on her belly. The baby was active today, rolling and kicking with the kind of energy that made Isabella wonder if she was carrying a fighter. She hoped so. This world would require one. Antonio called back in 90 minutes. "The number belongs to a burner phone," he said without preamble. "Activated 6 months ago, used exclusively to contact Carlo and 2 other low-level operatives. The payment trail is harder to track, but it originates from a shell company registered in Switzerland. 3 guesses who controls that company." "Tell me." "Luca De Luca." Isabella's blood went cold. Luca De Luca, the eldest son of the De Luca crime family, Marcus's most dangerous rival. Ruthless, intelligent, and patient enough to play a long game. "Are you certain?" she asked. "As certain as I can be without a legal audit. The paper trail is deliberately obscure, but all roads lead back to De Luca interests. Carlo's been on their payroll for at least 4 months. Possibly longer. What about the fake DNA report?" "That's harder to trace. But if I had to guess, I'd say it came from the same source. De Luca has connections to medical facilities, labs, people who can forge documents convincingly." Isabella closed her eyes, thinking, "They're trying to fracture us from the inside." "That's the play," Antonio agreed. "Turn Marcus against you, destabilize his judgment, create chaos, then move in when we're weak." "Does Marcus know about Carlo?" "Not yet. I wanted to talk to you first." "Good. Don't tell him." "Signora Ekich, if Marcus finds out, he'll kill Carlo immediately, publicly, violently, and that's exactly what De Luca wants. He wants Marcus to look paranoid and volatile. He wants to provoke a reaction that makes Marcus look weak to the other families." Antonio was quiet for a moment. So what do you want to do? I want to handle it quietly. Let me talk to Carlo first. Find out exactly what he's told DeLuca, what the plan is, how deep this goes. Then we'll decide how to proceed. And if Carlo doesn't cooperate, then we'll revisit the violent option, Isabella said calmly. But let's try intelligence before brutality. It's worked so far. Antonio chuckled, a dry, appreciative sound. You're more Belano than Belano, signora. I'll make the arrangements. When do you want to meet with Carlo? Tonight, somewhere private. And Antonio? Yes? Make sure he understands that running would be the last mistake he ever makes. Consider it done. Isabella hung up and sat in the growing darkness of her room, feeling the weight of what she was about to do. Confronting Carlo was a risk. If he was truly loyal to DeLuca, he might try to kill her. Or worse, he might lie convincingly enough that she wouldn't know the truth until it was too late. But sitting back and waiting for Marcus to stumble into DeLuca's trap was not an option. Not when her child's future hung in the balance. She dressed carefully that evening. Nothing flashy, nothing that screamed vulnerability. Simple black pants, a loose sweater that accommodated her growing belly, flat shoes she could move in if she needed to. She tied her hair back and looked at herself in the mirror. The woman staring back at her didn't look dangerous. She looked tired, pregnant, ordinary, perfect. Antonio had arranged the meeting in one of the old warehouses on the edge of Marcus's territory. Neutral ground technically, though everyone knew who actually controlled it. Isabella arrived just after sunset, driven by one of the few men she trusted. The warehouse was cold and cavernous, lit by a few flickering industrial lights that cast long shadows across the concrete floor. Carlo Messina was already there, flanked by two of Antonio's men. He looked nervous, his eyes darting around the space, his hands fidgeting at his sides. When he saw Isabella, confusion crossed his face. "Signora Belano?" he said, his voice tight. "I don't understand." Antonio said Signore Belano wanted to see me. Antonio was mistaken, Isabella said calmly, walking toward him with measured steps. "I'm the one who wanted to see you." Carlo's confusion deepened into suspicion. "Why?" "Because we need to have a conversation about your recent activities, and about who's been paying you to betray this family." The color drained from Carlo's face. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do." Isabella stopped a few feet away from him, close enough to see the sweat beading on his forehead. "Luca DeLuca has been depositing money into your account for 4 months. You've been making regular calls to an unlisted number registered to DeLuca interests. And you've been spreading rumors about me, trying to turn my husband against me. Would you like me to continue, or shall we skip to the part where you tell me why?" Carlo's jaw worked soundlessly. His eyes flicked to the men flanking him, but they remained impassive, their loyalty clearly with Antonio and not with him. I didn't have a choice," he finally said, his voice cracking. "There's always a choice," Isabella replied. "You chose money over loyalty. You chose ambition over honor. Now you're going to choose honesty over self-preservation, because I promise you, Carlo, lying to me right now would be the worst decision you've ever made." Carlo's breathing was rapid, panicked. "They threatened my sister, DeLuca's people. They said if I didn't cooperate, they'd kill her. She's all I have left." Isabella studied him, looking for signs of deception. She saw only fear, raw, genuine fear. "Where's your sister now?" "In Naples. She doesn't know anything about this. She's innocent." "What did DeLuca want you to do?" "Spread rumors. Make Signore Belano doubt you. He said if Marcus turned against you, the whole organization would fracture, that it would be easy to move in, take over territories, absorb operations." "What else?" Carlo hesitated. "What else, Carlo?" "He wanted me to find proof, real proof, that you were having an affair. He said if I could find it or create it, the DNA report would be more convincing." "And did you? Find proof or create it?" "No," Carlo said quickly. "I watched you for weeks. You never left the property without escorts. You never met with anyone suspicious. You were—" He trailed off, looking almost embarrassed. "You were completely faithful. There was nothing to find." Isabella felt a flicker of something that might have been satisfaction. "So DeLuca had to settle for a forged report." "I didn't know he was going to do that." I swear, I told him there was nothing, and then suddenly the report appeared. I didn't know where it came from. But you didn't stop it. I couldn't. They have my sister. Isabella was quiet for a long moment, weighing her options. Carlo was a traitor, yes, but he was also a desperate man trying to protect someone he loved. She understood that kind of desperation. She'd been living with it for months. Tell me about DeLuca's larger plan, she said finally. What happens after Marcus turns against me? He moves against the northern territories first, the ones Marcus has been neglecting. Then he pushes south, using the chaos to justify intervention. He's been meeting with some of the other families, trying to build a coalition. Which families? Moretti, Santoro, maybe the Russians, though I'm not sure about that. Isabella absorbed this information, her mind already calculating responses, countermoves, strategies. How often do you report to DeLuca? Every few days. He calls the burner phone. I tell him what I've learned. And what were you planning to tell him about tonight? Carlo looked genuinely confused. I don't know. I thought I was meeting with Signore Bellano. I thought... He swallowed hard. I thought this might be the end. It still might be, Isabella said quietly. That depends entirely on your next choices. What do you want me to do? I want you to continue reporting to DeLuca, but from now on you report what I tell you to report. You become my source inside his operation. You feed him information that I design that leads him exactly where I want him to go. Carlo stared at her. You want me to be a double agent? I want you to be useful. And if you're very good at it, if you do exactly what I say without deviation or doubt, then when this is over, I'll make sure your sister is safe. I'll get her out of Naples, set her up somewhere DeLuca can never find her, give her a life where she doesn't have to be leverage against you. And if I refuse? Then Antonio's men will kill you right now. DeLuca will kill your sister anyway because she's no longer useful, and I'll have to find another way to outmaneuver Luca DeLuca. Your choice, Carlo, but make it quickly. The silence stretched out, broken only by the distant sound of traffic and the wind rattling the warehouse windows. Carlo's face cycled through a dozen emotions: fear, anger, resignation, hope. What do you want me to tell him? He asked finally. Isabella smiled. It was a small, cold smile, the kind that didn't reach her eyes. Tell him the DNA test shook Marcus badly. Tell him Marcus is starting to isolate me, that he's questioning everything I say. Tell him the fracture is working. Is it true? Does it matter? Carlo shook his head slowly. No, I suppose it doesn't. Good. You'll receive instructions through Antonio. Follow them exactly. Don't improvise. Don't try to be clever. And Carlo? Yes, Signora? If you betray me again, there won't be a conversation. There won't be a warning. There will just be an ending. Do you understand? I understand. Then go. Antonio's men released Carlo, who stumbled toward the door like a man who'd just been granted an unexpected reprieve from execution. When he was gone, Antonio himself emerged from the shadows where he'd been listening. That was dangerous, he said. Letting him live. Everything is dangerous right now, Isabella replied. At least this way the danger is working for us instead of against us. Do you trust him? No, but I trust that he loves his sister more than he fears DeLuca. And love makes people predictable. Antonio nodded slowly. What's the play, Signora? What are we building toward? We're going to give Luca DeLuca exactly what he thinks he wants. We're going to make him believe he's winning. And when he's committed, when he's pushed all his pieces forward and left himself exposed, we're going to destroy him so completely that the other families will think twice before they ever come at us again. And Signore Bellano? When do we tell him? Isabella's expression hardened. We don't. Not yet. Marcus would try to handle this with violence and intimidation. He'd declare war, rally the troops, burn everything down. But wars are expensive, Antonio. They cost lives and money and leave us vulnerable to opportunists. I'd rather win this quietly, surgically, so that when it's over, we're stronger than we were before. He won't like being kept in the dark. He'll like being dead even less. And that's where we're headed if he starts making decisions based on pride instead of strategy. Antonio was quiet for a moment, then nodded. I'm with you, Signora, whatever you need. I need you to keep Carlo on a short leash. Monitor his communications with DeLuca. Make sure he's saying exactly what I told him to say. And I need you to start quietly reaching out to our allies. Not for war, for insurance. I want to know who we can count on if things go sideways. Consider it done. Isabella thanked him and made her way back to the car. As they drove through the dark streets toward the mansion, she felt the baby kick again, a strong, insistent movement that made her catch her breath. "You're going to be born into chaos," she whispered, her hand pressed against her belly. "But I promise you, by the time you arrive, this world will be safe. Or I'll die making it so." The mansion was quiet when she returned. Marcus wasn't home yet, still out dealing with whatever crisis had occupied his evening. Isabella went to her room, changed into comfortable clothes, and sat down to document everything that had happened. Names, dates, connections, plans. She kept it all in a small leather journal that never left her possession, written in a shorthand only she could read. If something happened to her, if DeLuca or someone else made a move she didn't anticipate, she wanted there to be a record. Evidence. Proof that she'd been fighting to protect this family even when no one knew she was doing it. She was still writing when Marcus came home near midnight. She heard his heavy footsteps in the hall, heard him pause outside her door. For a moment she thought he might knock, might come in, might try to bridge the distance that had grown between them. But he didn't. He just stood there for a few seconds, then moved on to his own room. Isabella closed her journal and turned out the light. The next morning brought new complications. Isabella was having breakfast when Maria rushed in, her face pale and frightened. "Signora, there's been an incident." Isabella set down her coffee carefully. "What kind of incident?" "One of our warehouses, the one on the east side. It was hit last night, burned to the ground." "Casualties?" "3 men dead, 5 injured." Isabella's jaw tightened. "Who did it?" "No one's claiming responsibility yet, but—" Maria hesitated. "But people are saying it was the DeLucas." Of course they were. DeLuca was escalating, testing Marcus's defenses, seeing how he'd respond. This was the next phase of the plan. Create chaos. Force Marcus into a reactive position. Make him look weak or reckless, depending on how he handled it. "Where's Marcus?" Isabella asked. "He left an hour ago. Went to the site to assess the damage." "Call Antonio. Tell him to meet me in the study in 20 minutes. Maria nodded and rushed out. Isabella finished her breakfast methodically, forcing herself to eat even though her appetite had vanished. The baby needed nutrition. She needed strength. Panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. When Antonio arrived, his expression was grim. "You've heard?" "I've heard. What do we know?" It was professional. Military-grade incendiaries, precise placement, time to cause maximum damage with minimum warning. This wasn't opportunistic. This was planned. DeLuca? Almost certainly. The timing is too convenient. Right after Carlo reported back to him about the DNA situation, right when Marcus is distracted and vulnerable. Isabella paced the study, her mind working through scenarios. Marcus will want to retaliate. He already does. I talked to him at the site. He's calling a meeting with the captains for tonight. He wants to hit back hard. We can't let him do that. Antonio looked uncomfortable. Signora, with respect, 3 of our men are dead. If we don't respond, we look weak. The other families will see it as an invitation. And if we respond with blind violence, we look reckless. DeLuca wins either way. Isabella stopped pacing and turned to face Antonio. We need a third option, something that shows strength without playing into his hands. What did you have in mind? Before Isabella could answer, the study door burst open. Marcus stood there, his suit streaked with ash, his face twisted with rage. 3 dead, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. 3 of our people burned alive because someone thought they could attack us without consequences. Marcus, Isabella started, but he cut her off. I know what you're going to say. Be patient. Be strategic. Think 3 moves ahead. He laughed bitterly. But while we're being patient, our people are dying. And if you retaliate now, more will die, on both sides, and we'll be locked into a war that costs us everything we've built. Some things are worth fighting for. I agree. But this isn't about fighting. This is about DeLuca manipulating you into making a mistake. Marcus's eyes narrowed. How do you know DeLuca is behind this? Isabella exchanged a glance with Antonio. This was the moment. She could tell Marcus everything, about Carlo, about the surveillance, about the larger plan, or she could continue to manage this herself, keep him in the dark for his own protection. She chose a middle path. Because it's exactly what I would do if I wanted to destabilize a rival, she said calmly. Create a crisis. Force an emotional response. Use that response to justify escalation. It's basic strategy, Marcus, and you're smarter than this. Don't patronize me. I'm not. I'm trying to save your life, and the lives of everyone in this organization. Marcus took a step toward her, and for a second Isabella saw something dangerous flash in his eyes. Then it was gone, replaced by exhaustion and something that might have been desperation. Then what do I do? He asked quietly. Because I can't just let this go. You don't let it go. You respond, but strategically, precisely, in a way that shows strength without giving DeLuca the war he wants. How? Isabella looked at Antonio. Pull records on DeLuca operations. I want to know every business they run, every asset they hold, every vulnerability they have. We're not going to hit their people. We're going to hit their money. Understanding dawned on Antonio's face. Economic warfare. Exactly. Freeze accounts. Interfere with shipments. Create regulatory problems. Make it expensive and complicated for them to operate. They want blood, but we'll give them bankruptcy instead. Marcus frowned. That's not what? Isabella interrupted. Not violent enough? Not satisfying? Maybe not. But it's effective. And it doesn't give DeLuca the excuse he needs to rally the other families against us. The men expect retaliation. Then give them one. But make it smart, targeted, something that hurts DeLuca without creating more casualties. Isabella met his eyes steadily. You built this empire through intelligence as much as violence, Marcus. Don't abandon that now just because you're angry. The silence that followed was heavy with tension. Marcus looked between Isabella and Antonio, his jaw working as he processed what she was saying. Finally, slowly, he nodded. All right, we'll try it your way. But if this doesn't work, you can burn everything down. I won't stop you. Isabella's voice softened slightly. But give me a chance to end this without losing more people we care about. Marcus studied her for a long moment, and Isabella saw something shift in his expression. Respect, maybe. A recognition that the woman standing before him was not the quiet, powerless wife he'd married. You've changed, he said. No, Isabella replied. I've just stopped pretending to be who you thought I was. Marcus left the study without another word, but Isabella could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands clenched and unclenched as he walked away. He was a man built for direct action, for the clarity of violence and immediate results. Asking him to fight a war with spreadsheets and regulatory filings went against every instinct he'd honed over decades in this world. But he'd agreed. For now, that was enough. Antonio waited until Marcus's footsteps faded down the hall before speaking. That took courage, Signora, standing up to him like that. It wasn't courage, Isabella replied, moving to the window. It was necessity. If Marcus goes to war with DeLuca right now, we lose everything. Even if we win, we lose. The casualties alone would cripple us, and the other families would see us as weakened, vulnerable. They'd circle like sharks. And you really think economic pressure will be enough? I think it will buy us time to strengthen our position, to shore up our alliances, to find DeLuca's real weakness. She turned back to face Antonio. Money is blood in this world. Cut off the flow, and even the strongest organization starts to die. It just dies slowly enough that people don't panic, don't rally together, don't turn it into a holy war. Antonio nodded slowly, his weathered face thoughtful. You've been planning this for a while, haven't you? This wasn't something you came up with this morning. I've been planning for every possibility since the moment I realized Marcus's enemies were circling. DeLuca was always the most dangerous because he's patient. He thinks long-term. He's willing to invest months or years into a strategy if it means winning completely. Isabella placed her hand on her belly, feeling the baby shift inside her. But he made one critical mistake. What's that? He assumed I was irrelevant. He built his entire strategy around manipulating Marcus, never considering that I might be the one actually steering this ship. She smiled faintly. By the time he realizes his error, it'll be too late. Antonio pulled out a small notebook, flipping it open. I'll need parameters for the economic operation. Which DeLuca assets do we target first? How aggressive do we get? Start with their shipping operations. They move most of their product through 3 primary companies. I want customs inspections, regulatory delays, missing paperwork, containers held up at ports. Nothing illegal on our end. Nothing they can prove is sabotage. Just bureaucratic friction that costs them time and money. That'll require buying some officials. Then buy them, but carefully. Use intermediaries. Don't leave trails that connect back to us. Antonio made notes, his pen scratching across the paper. What else? Their real estate holdings. Buildings they use for laundering. I want tax audits, building inspectors finding violations, zoning issues that tie up their properties in legal red tape. Again, everything above board from our side. We're just concerned citizens reporting potential problems. They'll know it's us. Of course they will, but they won't be able to prove it, and that's what matters. Isabella moved back to the desk, pulling out a folder she'd prepared days ago. I've already identified their most vulnerable points. These are the businesses running on thin margins, the operations where even small disruptions will cause significant damage. Hit these first. Antonio took the folder, his eyebrows rising as he scanned the contents. This is detailed work, Signora. When did you put this together? I've been building this file for 3 months. Since before Valeria. Since before any of this became active. Isabella met his eyes steadily. I told you, Antonio, I planned for every possibility. DeLuca was always going to make a move eventually. I just needed to be ready when he did. The older man shook his head, something like admiration crossing his face. Signore Bellano has no idea what he has in you. No, Isabella agreed quietly. He doesn't. But maybe that's for the best. Underestimation has been my greatest weapon. Antonio left to begin implementing the strategy, and Isabella spent the rest of the morning making calls to people Marcus didn't even know she had relationships with. A customs official in Naples who owed her a favor after she'd quietly helped his daughter get into university. A building inspector in Rome who appreciated the generous donation she made to his preferred charity. A tax attorney who specialized in finding creative interpretations of complicated regulations. She'd been building this network for years. Invisible threads of influence and obligation that Marcus had never noticed because they didn't involve guns or threats or traditional power. They were quiet connections built on helping people solve problems, on being useful without being obvious, on creating debts that could be called in when needed. Now she was calling them in. By afternoon, the machinery was in motion. DeLuca shipping containers were being held at 3 different ports, awaiting additional inspections. 2 of their restaurant fronts had received surprise visits from health inspectors who found concerning violations. A building they used for meetings suddenly faced new zoning restrictions that would require months of legal work to resolve. None of it was dramatic. None of it would make the news or cause immediate panic. But together, it was the beginning of a slow bleed that would drain DeLuca resources and attention, force them to fight battles on multiple fronts, create the kind of grinding operational stress that broke organizations from the inside. Isabella monitored the reports as they came in, adjusting her strategy in real time, redirecting pressure where it would be most effective. She felt the baby kick and realized she'd been so focused she'd forgotten to eat lunch. Maria brought her a tray without being asked, setting it down with a knowing look. You should rest, Signora, the housekeeper said gently. All this stress isn't good for the baby. The baby will be fine, Isabella replied, but she forced herself to eat anyway. Maria was right, even if Isabella didn't want to admit it. She was 7 months pregnant now, her body growing heavier and more unwieldy by the day. There would come a point where she couldn't maintain this pace, when physical limitations would force her to slow down. But not yet. Not while the war was still being fought. That evening, Marcus held his meeting with the captains. Isabella wasn't invited, of course. Wives didn't attend such gatherings. But she stationed herself in a nearby room where she could hear the raised voices, the arguments, the demands for blood and retribution. She heard Marcus explain the new strategy, heard the skepticism and anger from men who wanted immediate violence. But she also heard him hold firm, heard him use the argument she'd given him, heard him assert control over men who were used to getting their way. When the meeting finally ended and the captains filed out, their expressions were unhappy but compliant. Isabella felt a small measure of relief. Marcus had held the line. For now, they would fight this war her way. Marcus found her in the sitting room afterwards, pouring himself a large whiskey with hands that weren't quite steady. They think I'm going soft, he said, downing half the glass in one swallow. They think the pregnancy has made you weak, and the weakness is spreading to me. Do you care what they think? I care about maintaining control. Respect is everything in this world. If they start seeing me as weak, as controlled by my wife, then they'll need to be reminded who's actually kept this organization running smoothly for the past year, Isabella interrupted calmly. How many territorial disputes have we avoided because I negotiated quiet agreements with rivals' wives and mothers? How many potential betrayals did I uncover before they became active threats? How many times have I saved you from walking into traps you didn't even see? Marcus stared at her. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that while you've been busy playing the visible role of boss, managing the day-to-day operations and handling the obvious threats, I've been managing everything else. The subtle threats, the long-term planning, the quiet diplomacy that keeps us from being at war with everyone simultaneously. Isabella set down her book. You think those captains respect you because you're willing to kill people? They respect you because this organization is successful, profitable, stable, and it's successful because I've been working behind the scenes to make it that way. That's not... Marcus stopped, his expression shifting as he processed what she was saying. The deal with the Moretti family last year, the one that gave us access to the northern ports, that was you? Their matriarch and I had tea. We discussed our children, our hopes for the future, the benefits of cooperation over conflict. By the time the official negotiations started, the real decisions had already been made. The problem with the union leaders at the docks, the strike that didn't happen. I met with the leader's wife, helped her son get medical treatment he couldn't afford. The strike dissolved quietly a week later. Marcus sank into a chair, his whiskey forgotten. How many of these arrangements do you have? Enough. More than you know. More than I'll ever tell you, because the moment they become visible, they stop being useful. Isabella's voice softened slightly. I'm not trying to undermine you, Marcus. I'm trying to protect what we've built. But I need you to trust me. Really trust me. Not just assume I'm sitting around being decorative while you do all the real work. I never thought... Yes, you did. You've always thought it. Because I let you think it. Because being underestimated gave me freedom to operate in ways I never could have if you'd been watching my every move. She stood carefully, her pregnancy making the movement slower than it used to be. But things are different now. We're facing a real threat, one that requires both of us working together instead of me working around you. Marcus looked at her with an expression she'd never seen before. It wasn't quite respect and wasn't quite fear. It was something closer to recognition, as if he was seeing her clearly for the first time in their entire marriage. I don't know you at all, he said quietly. No, Isabella agreed, but maybe it's time you started learning. The next week passed in a careful dance of pressure and patience. Isabella's economic warfare strategy began showing results. DeLuca operations were snarled in red tape and unexpected complications. Their shipping costs increased by 30% as containers sat in ports awaiting inspection. Their real estate holdings became liabilities as building violations piled up. Even their legitimate businesses started hemorrhaging money as regulatory attention made normal operations nearly impossible. Carlo continued his role as unwitting double agent, feeding DeLuca carefully crafted misinformation that Isabella designed to waste his resources and misdirect his attention. Through Carlo, Isabella learned that DeLuca was indeed building a coalition with the Moretti and Santoro families, but the financial pressure was making them nervous. Wars were expensive, and if the Bolano organization was strong enough to wage economic warfare this effectively, maybe they were stronger than DeLuca had suggested. But success brought new dangers. DeLuca wasn't stupid. He would eventually realize that his strategy wasn't working, that the economic pressure was too precise to be coincidental. When that happened, he would adapt, probably violently. Isabella was preparing for that adaptation when the first real crack appeared in her carefully constructed plan. It came in the form of a phone call at 2 a.m. Isabella was still awake, had been having trouble sleeping as the pregnancy advanced, and the baby's movements became more frequent and forceful. She answered her phone to find Antonio's voice tight with tension. "We have a problem, Signora." Isabella sat up carefully, her heart rate accelerating. "What kind of problem?" "Carlo missed his check-in. He was supposed to call me 6 hours ago. He's not answering his phone. His apartment is empty." DeLuca found out. That's the assumption. Isabella's mind raced through implications and possibilities. If DeLuca had discovered Carlo's betrayal, He would extract every piece of information he could before killing him. That meant he now knew about Isabella's involvement, about the economic strategy, about everything Carlo had learned. "We need to assume DeLuca knows everything," Isabella said. "Pull our exposed people back, shore up security, and find out what happened to Carlo. If he's still alive, we need to know what he told them." Already in motion. "But Signora, if DeLuca knows you're the one running this operation, then he'll come for me directly." "I know." Isabella pressed her free hand against her belly, feeling the baby kick as if sensing her tension. "Double the security on the mansion. I want guards I trust, people who've been with the family for years. No one knew, no one Carlo would have had access to." "What about Signore Bellano? Does he need to know?" Isabella hesitated. This was the moment where her control could slip, where Marcus's protective instincts and desire for direct action could override her strategy. But keeping him in the dark while she was potentially in danger felt like a betrayal too far. "Tell him," she said finally. "But frame it carefully. I don't want him panicking and doing something rash." "Understood. I'll handle it." Isabella hung up and sat in the darkness of her room, listening to the old mansion settle and creak around her. She'd known this moment would come eventually. The moment where theory became reality, where careful planning met unpredictable human violence. She'd prepared for it as best she could, but preparation and reality were different things. The baby kicked again, harder this time, and Isabella spoke softly into the quiet room. "I know, I'm scared too, but we're going to be all right. We have to be." She didn't sleep the rest of that night. Instead, she reviewed her contingency plans, checking and rechecking every detail, every possibility, every escape route, and fallback position. By the time dawn broke, she had 3 different scenarios mapped out depending on how DeLuca chose to respond. Marcus found her at breakfast, his face drawn with worry and anger. "Antonio told me. About Carlo. About the security risk." "I have it under control. You're 7 months pregnant and potentially being targeted by one of the most dangerous men in Italy. You do not have it under control." Isabella set down her coffee cup with deliberate care. "What would you like me to do differently, Marcus? Hide in a panic room? Run away? Abandon everything we've built because there's risk involved? I want you to let me protect you." "You are protecting me. The guards, the security measures, all of that is protection. But I'm not going to stop working just because things got dangerous. Danger is the default state of our world. You know that better than anyone." Marcus pulled out a chair and sat across from her, his eyes intense. "This is different. Before, you were working behind the scenes, invisible. Now DeLuca knows. Now you're a target. That changes everything." "It changes nothing, except now we know he knows, which actually gives us an advantage. We can anticipate his moves, prepare for them, use his knowledge against him." "How?" Isabella smiled faintly. "By giving him exactly what he expects. He expects me to be afraid, to hide, to become a liability you need to protect. So we'll show him that. We'll make it look like I've retreated, like the pregnancy and the fear have sidelined me. And while he's focused on that false narrative, we'll be preparing the real strike." "What real strike?" "The one that ends this war completely. Not with a truce or a stalemate, but with DeLuca's organization so damaged they'll never threaten us again." Isabella leaned forward. "But I need time to set it up, which means I need you to trust me for just a little bit longer." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his eyes searching her face. "You're asking me to watch my pregnant wife walk into danger and do nothing. I'm asking you to watch your partner execute a plan that will keep our child safe for the rest of their life. There's a difference. And if something goes wrong, if DeLuca moves faster than you expect, then you'll do what you've always done. You'll fight. You'll protect what's yours. You'll burn down anyone who threatens our family." Isabella reached across the table and took his hand, a gesture she couldn't remember making in months. "But Marcus, if you trust me, if you let me finish this my way, there won't be anything to fight. DeLuca will be neutralized before he can make his move." Marcus looked down at their joined hands, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. "When did you become so fearless?" "I'm not fearless. I'm terrified. Every single day. But fear doesn't mean inaction. It means being very, very careful about which actions you take." He nodded slowly, then stood, still holding her hand. "All right, we do it your way. But the moment I think you're in real danger, all bets are off. Understood? Understood. Marcus left to coordinate with Antonio on the enhanced security measures, and Isabella finished her breakfast alone. She was clearing her plate when Maria rushed in, her face pale. Signora, there's someone at the gate. A woman. She says she needs to speak with you urgently. Who is she? She says her name is Elena. Elena Messina, Carlo's sister. Isabella felt her pulse quicken. Let her in, but have 2 guards escort her to the sitting room. No one else comes or goes while she's here.
Yes, signora. 10 minutes later, Isabella faced Elena Messina across the elegant sitting room. The woman was younger than Isabella had expected, maybe 25, with dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail and eyes red from crying. She twisted a worn purse strap between her hands, her whole body radiating fear and desperation. Thank you for seeing me, Elena said, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know where else to go. Where's your brother? Isabella asked directly. Elena's face crumpled. They took him 3 days ago. Men came to my apartment in Naples, said they knew what Carlo had been doing, said he'd betrayed important people. They took him and told me if I went to the police, if I told anyone, they'd kill us both. But you came here anyway. Because Carlo told me if anything ever happened to him, I should come to you. He said you were the only one who might be able to help. Elena's eyes filled with fresh tears. He said you promised to keep me safe if he did what you asked. Is that true? Isabella studied the young woman carefully, looking for signs of deception or manipulation. But all she saw was genuine terror and grief. Your brother was working for me, yes, and I did promise to protect you if he remained loyal. He was loyal. I swear he was. He was trying to fix his mistakes, trying to do the right thing. And now they have him, and I don't know if he's even alive. Who has him? Did they tell you? They didn't have to. I recognize one of them. Lorenzo Ricci. He works for Luca De Luca. Isabella's jaw tightened. So De Luca had Carlo, which meant interrogation, torture, probably death. The question was how much Carlo had already told them and how much damage control was needed. Did they follow you here? Isabella asked. I don't think so. I took 3 different trains, doubled back twice. Carlo taught me how to do that, said it was important to know how to disappear if things ever got bad. Smart brother. He tried to be. He really did. Elena wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Can you help him? Can you get him back? Isabella wanted to lie, to offer false comfort, to tell this frightened woman that everything would be all right, but lies would only make things worse. If De Luca has him, if he's been taken to one of their secure locations, then the chances of getting him back alive are very small. Your brother knew the risks when he agreed to work with me. He chose to take them. But you promised to keep me safe. And I will. That promise stands. But I need you to understand that helping you might mean accepting that your brother is already gone. Elena's face twisted with pain, but she nodded. I understand. I need to know he didn't die for nothing, that what he was doing mattered. It mattered, Isabella said quietly. Your brother helped prevent a war. He gave us information that saved lives on both sides. That's not nothing, Elena. That's worth something. The younger woman took a shaky breath. What happens now? Now you disappear completely. New name, new city, new life. I have people who specialize in this kind of thing. They'll take you somewhere De Luca can never find you, set you up with everything you need to start over. Isabella pulled a card from her pocket and handed it to Elena. There's a phone number on there. Call it in exactly 1 hour. Someone will answer and give you instructions. Follow them exactly. Don't deviate. Don't contact anyone from your old life. Just go. Elena took the card with trembling hands. And if they find me anyway? They won't. As long as you follow the instructions and don't do anything stupid, you'll be safe. I don't know how to thank you. You can thank me by surviving, by building a good life somewhere far away from all of this, by being the one person who got out intact. Isabella stood, signaling the end of the conversation. You should go now. The guards will escort you out through a side entrance. Don't use the main gate. Elena stood as well, clutching her purse like a lifeline. Signora Bellano? Yes? My brother said you were the smartest person he'd ever met. He said if anyone could win against De Luca, it was you. She met Isabella's eyes. I hope he was right. So do I. Isabella replied. After Elena left, Isabella made a series of quick phone calls activating the network she'd built for exactly this kind of situation. By evening, Elena Messina would be on a train to Germany with new identification and enough money to start over. By next week, she'd have a new name, a new apartment, and a new job arranged through intermediaries who'd never met Isabella and never would. One more thread secured, one more vulnerability addressed. But Carlo's capture changed the strategic landscape. DeLuca now knew too much, which meant he would move soon. Probably within days. Possibly within hours. Isabella had been preparing for this scenario, but preparation and execution were different challenges. She needed to accelerate her timeline, move faster than she'd planned, take risks she'd hoped to avoid. She needed to force DeLuca's hand before he was ready, and she knew exactly how to do it. That evening, she called Antonio to her study. When he arrived, she was already laying out documents on the desk, building the architecture of what would be her final move against Luca DeLuca. "We're done playing defense," she said without preamble. "It's time to end this." Antonio looked at the documents, his expression growing concerned as he recognized what he was seeing. "Signora, this is dangerous. If it goes wrong, we're no worse off than we are now. DeLuca has Carlo, which means he knows our strategy. He'll be adapting, planning his own endgame. We need to move first, move hard, and move in a way he won't expect." By hitting his family directly? By giving him a choice, a very simple choice. Stand down completely, dissolve his coalition, and accept a subordinate position in the regional hierarchy. Or watch everything he's built burn to the ground so thoroughly there won't be ashes left to rebuild from. Antonio shook his head slowly. "That's not a negotiation. That's a declaration of total war." "No," Isabella corrected. "It's the threat of total war. There's a difference. DeLuca is a businessman at heart. He understands cost-benefit analysis. Right now, he thinks he can win against us. We're going to show him exactly what the cost of trying would be. And once he sees that cost, once he really understands it, he'll back down. And if he doesn't, then we execute the threat, and we live with the consequences." Isabella placed her hand on her belly, feeling the baby's familiar movements. "But one way or another, this ends before my child is born. I won't bring a baby into an active war zone. I won't spend the first months of their life wondering if DeLuca is going to send someone to kill us in our sleep." Antonio was quiet for a long moment, studying the documents. "This will require Signore Bellano's approval, resources, personnel, access to certain assets. You can't do this alone." "I know. That's why you're going to help me convince him." "Me? You're the one he trusts, the one who's been with this family longer than anyone. If you tell him this is the right move, he'll listen. And if I don't think it's the right move," Isabella met his eyes steadily, "then tell me now, and I'll find another way. I value your judgment, Antonio. I always have. If you think I'm wrong, if you think this will backfire, say so. I'll listen." Antonio picked up one of the documents, scanning it carefully. Then another. Then a third. Isabella watched him process the information, saw him running scenarios in his mind, weighing risks against rewards. Finally, he set the papers down and looked at her with something like pride in his weathered face. "You're not wrong," he said quietly. "This is bold, dangerous. But it's also the only move that gives us a real chance at ending this without years of bleeding. DeLuca won't expect this level of aggression from us, especially not now when he thinks he has the upper hand. So you'll help?" "I'll help, but we need to move fast. Once we start this, there's no pulling back, no second chances." "I know." Isabella began gathering the documents. "Set up a meeting with Marcus for tonight. Bring the captains you trust most. We'll present this as a unified strategy, not just my plan. That way, when Marcus sees that his most experienced people support it, he'll be more likely to agree." "And if he doesn't?" Isabella smiled, cold and certain. "Then I'll remind him that I've been right about everything else so far, and ask him if he really wants to bet against me now." The meeting convened at midnight in the mansion's war room, a space Marcus had built in the basement years ago when paranoia and practicality had intersected. Soundproofed walls, reinforced doors, no windows, and a table large enough to seat 20 men comfortably. Tonight, there were only 7 people present. Marcus at the head of the table, Antonio to his right, 3 captains who'd proven their loyalty over decades,
and Isabella seated at the opposite end in a chair that had been adjusted to accommodate her pregnancy. The captains had looked surprised when she'd entered, exchanging glances that ranged from confusion to poorly concealed disapproval. Women didn't attend these meetings. It simply wasn't done. But Marcus had nodded to her without comment, and no one dared question his decision aloud. Isabella waited until everyone was settled before she began. She didn't stand, didn't make a show of authority. She simply started speaking in that quiet, steady voice that somehow commanded attention more effectively than shouting ever could. "DeLuca has been bleeding us for weeks now," she said. "Not through direct violence, though the warehouse fire was part of his strategy. Through manipulation, psychological warfare, attempts to fracture our leadership and turn us against each other. He's been patient, methodical, and effective. But his patience is about to become his greatest weakness." One of the captains, a thick-necked man named Salvatore, leaned forward. "With respect, Signora Bellano, we know what DeLuca has been doing. What we need to discuss is how to respond with force, not economic pressure," Isabella interrupted smoothly. "The strategy that's cost DeLuca over 3 million euros in the past 2 weeks? The one that's made his coalition partners nervous about their own exposure? That strategy?" Salvatore's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Isabella continued. "The economic warfare bought us time and intelligence. It forced DeLuca to show his hand, to reveal his coalition partners, to expose the infrastructure he relies on. But you're right, that it's not enough. Economic pressure wounds, it doesn't kill. And we need DeLuca neutralized completely, permanently, in a way that sends a message to every other family in Italy that we are not to be tested." Now she had their full attention. Even the skeptical ones were leaning in, curious despite themselves. "What are you proposing?" Marcus asked, his voice carefully neutral. Isabella nodded to Antonio, who began distributing folders to each person at the table. "In these folders, you'll find detailed information on every significant DeLuca asset, operation, and relationship. Real estate, businesses, political connections, everything. You'll also find documentation of several activities that, if brought to the attention of certain authorities, would result in immediate criminal prosecution. Tax fraud, human trafficking, illegal weapons sales, crimes that even sympathetic judges can't ignore. We all commit those crimes," another captain said. "Exposing them exposes the whole system." "Exactly," Isabella replied, "which is why we don't expose them to local authorities. We expose them to international bodies, Europol, Interpol, organizations that don't care about local politics or traditional accommodations. We make DeLuca radioactive on an international level, and suddenly his domestic protections mean nothing." Salvatore frowned. "That's a dangerous precedent. Today it's DeLuca. Tomorrow it could be us. It won't be us because we're going to be very careful about what evidence exists and where it's kept. Unlike DeLuca, who's been sloppy because he never thought anyone would dare use these weapons against him." Isabella opened her own folder, pulling out a specific document. "This is a record of a DeLuca shipment that moved through 3 different countries, carrying materials that violate multiple international treaties. One anonymous tip to the right people, and DeLuca becomes an international fugitive. His assets get frozen globally. His people start looking for new employment. His coalition collapses because no one wants to be associated with someone under that level of scrutiny." "And where did you get this information?" Marcus asked quietly. "I've been collecting it for months. Some came from Carlo before his capture. Some from other sources I've cultivated. Some from simple observation and documentation." Isabella met her husband's eyes. "I told you I've been planning for every possibility. This was always one of them." The room fell silent as the men absorbed what she was proposing. It was bold to the point of recklessness, a strategy that violated unwritten rules about how conflicts were conducted in their world. But it was also devastatingly effective if executed properly. "There's more," Isabella continued. "We don't just threaten DeLuca with exposure. We give him a choice, a clear, simple choice that preserves his life and even some of his dignity. He stands down, publicly acknowledges our territorial supremacy, and accepts a subordinate role in the regional hierarchy. In exchange, the evidence stays buried. He gets to keep breathing, keep some of his operations, keep some semblance of power. But the war ends, completely, permanently." "He'll never agree," Salvatore said. "Men like DeLuca don't bow to anyone. Men like DeLuca are pragmatists,"
Isabella countered. They understand survival, and when the alternative is complete destruction, most people choose survival. And if he refuses, Marcus asked, then we execute the threat. We burn him down so completely that his name becomes a cautionary tale. And yes, that will be ugly. Yes, there will be consequences, but those consequences will fall on DeLuca, not on us. We'll be the family that had the strength to do what was necessary. Antonio cleared his throat. I've reviewed Senora Bolano's documentation. It's comprehensive, actionable. If we move forward with this, we should do so quickly, before DeLuca has time to shore up his defenses or move assets we can't track. Marcus drummed his fingers on the table. A habit Isabella had learned meant he was thinking hard, weighing options. This is a significant escalation. Once we threaten him this way, there's no walking it back. There's no walking anything back at this point, Isabella said. DeLuca has Carlo. He's interrogating him, extracting information, planning his own endgame. We're already committed to a final confrontation. The only question is whether we dictate the terms or let him dictate them. She's right, one of the other captains said, a lean man named Pietro, who'd always struck Isabella as one of the smarter ones. We're in the endgame whether we like it or not. Might as well play to win. Marcus looked around the table, reading the faces of his most trusted men. Isabella could see the calculation happening behind his eyes, the same process she'd watched him use 100 times when making difficult decisions. He was weighing loyalty against risk, tradition against innovation, his own instincts against evidence. Finally, he nodded. All right, we do it, but carefully. Antonio, you coordinate the intelligence gathering and documentation. Make sure everything is airtight, verifiable, devastating. Pietro, you handle the international contacts. Find the right people to feed this information to if it comes to that. Salvatore, shore up our defenses. If DeLuca realizes what we're doing before we're ready, he'll come hard. I want us ready to weather that storm. The captains nodded, already mentally organizing their tasks. Isabella felt a small measure of relief. Marcus had committed. Now came the difficult part, actually executing the plan without getting anyone killed. How do we deliver the ultimatum? Marcus asked. Face to face, Isabella said. Anything else leaves room for misinterpretation. We need DeLuca to see our certainty, to understand that this isn't a bluff. That means a meeting on neutral ground with enough security to prevent immediate violence, but not so much that it feels like a trap. That's risky, for both sides. All the best negotiations are. Isabella shifted in her chair, her back aching from sitting too long. The baby chose that moment to kick hard against her ribs, making her wince. But it's the only way to end this cleanly. DeLuca needs to see that we're serious, that we're prepared to follow through, and that we're offering him a genuine way out that preserves his life and some of his dignity. Marcus studied her for a long moment. You should stay here. Let Antonio and me handle the meeting. No. Isabella. I need to be there, she said firmly. DeLuca has underestimated me from the beginning. That underestimation is part of why we're in this position. If I show up to the meeting, visibly pregnant, obviously involved in the strategy, it will shake him, make him question every assumption he's made about our organization. That psychological advantage is worth the risk. You're 7 months pregnant. I'm aware, but I'm also the one who built this strategy, who gathered the intelligence, who understands every nuance of what we're offering and threatening. You need me there, Marcus, whether you want to admit it or not. The captains were watching this exchange with poorly concealed fascination. A married couple negotiating strategy, the wife pushing back against the husband, and the husband actually listening instead of simply asserting dominance. It was probably the most unusual thing any of them had witnessed in this room. If you come, Marcus said finally, you stay back. You don't engage directly, and at the first sign of trouble, you leave, immediately. No arguments. Agreed. Antonio, set up the meeting. Neutral location, minimal security on both sides, daylight hours. Let's do this properly. Marcus stood, signaling the end of the meeting. Everyone knows their assignments. We move fast, we move clean, and we end this war before it costs us anything else. The captains filed out, leaving Isabella alone with Marcus and Antonio. The older man gave Isabella a small nod of approval before heading for the door. I'll start making contacts, he said. Should have something set up within 48 hours. After he left, Marcus moved to sit beside Isabella, his expression troubled. This is dangerous.
More dangerous than anything you've done so far.
I know. If something happens to you, if DeLuca decides to ignore protocol and just... He won't, Isabella interrupted. Not at a formal meeting. Not when he knows that killing me would give you the moral authority to destroy him with the full support of every other family in Italy. Even DeLuca isn't reckless enough to break that fundamental rule.
You're betting your life on his rationality. I'm betting our child's future on our ability to end this war decisively. Isabella placed her hand over Marcus's, a gesture that still felt strange and unfamiliar after months of distance. I know you're afraid. I'm afraid too. But fear can't stop us from doing what needs to be done. Marcus turned his hand over, gripping hers tightly. When did you become braver than me? I'm not brave. I'm just tired of being afraid. There's a difference. They sat in silence for a moment, hands linked, the weight of what was coming settling over them like a physical presence. Finally, Marcus stood, helping Isabella to her feet with unexpected gentleness. Get some rest, he said. The next few days are going to be difficult. What about you? I have calls to make, people to prepare, the usual pre-war rituals. He smiled faintly. Though I suppose this isn't exactly a traditional war. No, Isabella agreed. But then again, nothing about us has ever been traditional. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of preparation and tension. Antonio worked his contacts to arrange a meeting location, finally settling on a restaurant in neutral territory, a place that had hosted similar negotiations before and understood the protocols involved. The owner was paid handsomely to close for the day, to ensure privacy and security, to ask no questions about what was discussed. Isabella spent the time reviewing every detail of their evidence, making sure she understood not just what they had, but how to present it most effectively. She rehearsed arguments, anticipated objections, prepared for every possible direction the conversation might take. This was her strategy, her plan, and she refused to be the weak link in its execution. Marcus threw himself into security preparations with the intensity of a man who knew his wife was walking into danger and was desperate to control every variable he could. He personally vetted every guard who would be present, planned escape routes, arranged for additional forces to be positioned nearby in case things went wrong. On the morning of the meeting, Isabella dressed carefully. Conservative but professional, nothing that screamed wealth or power, but nothing that suggested weakness either. She looked at herself in the mirror and saw a pregnant woman who'd somehow become a strategist, a negotiator, a force that men like Luca DeLuca had to take seriously. The thought was both empowering and terrifying. The drive to the restaurant took 40 minutes through streets Isabella knew well. This was her city too, though she'd spent most of her marriage confined to the mansion or escorted to safe, approved locations. She watched the familiar buildings pass and wondered if this would be the last time she saw them as a woman at war, or if somehow, impossibly, the war would end today. The restaurant was in an old building with thick stone walls and small windows, the kind of place that valued discretion above all else. Antonio had arrived early to sweep for threats and ensure the space was secure. He met them at a side entrance, his face grave. DeLuca is already here, he said quietly. Arrived 10 minutes ago with 3 men, all armed but following protocol. No signs of additional forces nearby. Good, Isabella said, her voice steadier than she felt. Let's not keep him waiting. The main dining room had been cleared of all furniture except a single table set with 4 chairs. Luca DeLuca sat facing the door, his 3 bodyguards standing behind him at a respectful distance. He was younger than Isabella had expected, maybe 40, handsome in a cold, calculated way. His suit was expensive but understated, his posture relaxed but alert. This was a man who'd survived in their world through intelligence and ruthlessness in equal measure. His eyes tracked Isabella as she entered, and she saw surprise flicker across his face. He'd known she might attend, but seeing her visibly pregnant, moving with quiet confidence despite her condition, clearly threw him off balance for just a moment. That moment was all Isabella needed to claim the psychological high ground. Marcus took the seat across from DeLuca while Isabella settled into the chair beside him, her movements deliberate and unhurried despite the awkwardness of her pregnancy. Antonio remained standing, positioned where he could see both entrances and respond to threats from any direction. Luca, Marcus said, his tone neutral. Thank you for agreeing to meet. Marcus. And Signora Bellano. DeLuca's voice was smooth, cultured, with just a hint of Naples still present in certain vowels. I'll admit your presence is unexpected. Shouldn't you be resting, preparing for motherhood, leaving these unpleasant matters to the men? If I left unpleasant matters to the men, we wouldn't be having this meeting, Isabella replied calmly. We'd be in the middle of a war that would cost both our families everything. Instead, we're here to offer you a choice. DeLuca smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. A choice? How generous. And what choice might that be? Marcus slid a folder across the table. Open it. DeLuca made no move to touch the folder. Why don't you just tell me what's inside? Save us all some time. Inside is documentation of your organization's activities over the past 3 years, Isabella said. Tax fraud, human trafficking, weapons sales to prohibited entities, violations of international treaties. Enough evidence to put you and most of your leadership in prison for the rest of your lives. Enough to freeze your assets globally, to make you an international fugitive, to turn every law enforcement agency in Europe into your enemy. The smile faded from DeLuca's face. Everyone in this room has committed similar crimes. Mutual destruction is not a winning strategy. Except we've been very careful about documentation and exposure, Marcus said. You haven't. You assumed local protections would always be enough. You never considered that someone might go over the heads of your bought judges and complicit politicians directly to international authorities who don't care about traditional arrangements. DeLuca finally opened the folder, his eyes scanning the first few pages. Isabella watched his expression shift from dismissive to concerned to genuinely worried as he processed what he was seeing. These weren't vague allegations or circumstantial evidence. These were detailed records, shipping manifests, financial transactions, communications that spelled out exactly what he'd done and when. Where did you get this? He asked quietly. Does it matter? Isabella replied. What matters is that we have it, and that we're prepared to use it if you don't accept our offer. Your offer being? Stand down, Marcus said. Publicly acknowledge our territorial supremacy. Dissolve your coalition with the Moretti and Santoro families. Accept a subordinate position in the regional hierarchy with restricted operations in areas we designate. In exchange, this evidence stays buried. You keep your life, keep some of your business, keep some dignity. You're asking me to surrender. We're offering you survival, Isabella corrected. There's a difference. In a surrender, you lose everything. In this arrangement, you lose some things, but keep what matters most. Your life, your freedom, a future for your own family. DeLuca closed the folder slowly, his jaw tight with barely controlled rage. And if I refuse? Then we send copies of this evidence to Europol, Interpol, the FBI, and several investigative journalists who would love to break a story about international organized crime, Isabella said. Within a week, you'll be the most wanted man in Europe. Your assets will be frozen. Your people will abandon you because being associated with you will become toxic. Your coalition will collapse because no one wants to be caught in the same dragnet. And when you're eventually caught, and you will be caught, you'll spend the rest of your life in a cell. That's not a choice. That's extortion. Call it what you want, Marcus said. But make a decision, because we're not leaving this room until you do. The silence that followed was thick with tension. Isabella could see DeLuca's mind working, could almost feel him running scenarios, looking for angles, searching for a way out that preserved his power. But she'd built this trap carefully, had closed every exit except the one she was offering. You think you're clever, DeLuca said finally, his eyes fixed on Isabella. You think you've outmaneuvered me, but all you've done is start a war you can't control. International attention doesn't just fall on me, it falls on everyone. On you, on your precious baby. We're prepared for that risk, Isabella replied. Are you? I could kill you right now, end this threat permanently. You could try, Antonio said quietly from his position by the wall. But you'd die 30 seconds later, and every family in Italy would hunt down everyone you've ever cared about. That's not a trade you want to make, DeLuca. You're too smart for suicide. DeLuca's hands clenched into fists on the table. Isabella could see the war happening behind his eyes, pride fighting with pragmatism, ego battling with survival instinct. This was the moment. The point where he either accepted reality or let his pride destroy him. How do I know you'll keep your word? He asked finally, his voice strained. How do I know you won't use this evidence anyway once I've stood down? Because we don't need to, Marcus said. Once you've accepted a subordinate position, you stop being a threat. You become just another operator in a hierarchy we control. Why would we waste resources destroying someone who's no longer a problem? And my coalition partners? They're your concern, not ours, Isabella said. Though I suspect once they learn you've stood down, they'll lose interest in confronting us themselves. No one wants to fight a war their strongest ally has already surrendered from. DeLuca stared at the folder for a long moment, and Isabella held her breath, waiting. Everything came down to this. Either he accepted, and the war ended with minimal bloodshed, or he refused, and they'd have to execute the threat and deal with all the chaos that followed. I need time, DeLuca said finally, to consult with my people, to arrange— No, Isabella interrupted. You decide now, right here, because every hour you delay is an hour you might use to hide assets, destroy evidence, prepare for war. We're not giving you that opportunity. You're asking me to surrender my entire organization on the spot? We're asking you to choose survival over pride. Most intelligent people would call that an easy choice. DeLuca's laugh was bitter and hollow. You really think you've won, don't you? You think this is over? I think, Isabella said quietly, that you're about to make the most important decision of your life. And I think you're smart enough to make the right one, even if it hurts. The silence stretched out again, endless and suffocating. Isabella felt the baby kick, as if sensing her tension, and she pressed her hand against her belly in an unconscious gesture of protection. DeLuca saw the movement, and something shifted in his expression. How far along are you? 7 months? Boy or girl? We don't know yet. He nodded slowly, and when he spoke again, his voice had lost some of its edge. I have a daughter, 3 years old. She doesn't know what her father does, who he really is. I'd like to keep it that way. I'd like her to grow up without ever having to visit me in prison or attend my funeral. Then accept our terms, Isabella said. Give your daughter a father who's alive and free, even if he's not as powerful as he used to be. That's still better than the alternative. DeLuca closed his eyes, his face twisted with an emotion Isabella couldn't quite read. Rage, grief, resignation, all mixed together into something raw and painful. Fine, he said finally, the word coming out like it cost him something vital. I accept your terms. I'll stand down, publicly. I'll dissolve the coalition. I'll operate within whatever restrictions you set. He opened his eyes, and they were hard as stone. But know this, Senora Belano. You may have won today, but you've also made an enemy who will remember this humiliation for the rest of his life. I can live with that, Isabella replied, as long as you live with it too, instead of dying over it. Marcus pulled out another document, already prepared, already waiting for this exact outcome. Sign here. It's a formal agreement outlining the terms we discussed, witnessed, dated, legally binding in ways that matter to our world. DeLuca took the pen Marcus offered and signed without reading, his signature angry and sharp across the bottom of the page. When he finished, he threw the pen down and stood abruptly. We're done here. Not quite, Antonio said, pulling out his phone. We need confirmation that your forces are standing down, right now, before you leave this room. DeLuca glared at him, but made the necessary calls, each one clearly costing him something as he ordered his captains to withdraw, to cease operations, to acknowledge the new hierarchy. Isabella listened to each conversation, verifying that the orders were genuine, that this wasn't some elaborate deception. When the last call was made, DeLuca pocketed his phone and looked at Isabella one final time. You're dangerous. More dangerous than your husband, maybe. Because people underestimate you. They see the pregnancy, the quiet demeanor, and they think you're harmless. But you're not, are you? No, Isabella agreed. I'm not. Good luck with the baby, Senora Belano. I hope they inherit your mind and your ruthlessness. They'll need both to survive in this world. He walked out without another word, his bodyguards following in silence. Isabella sat very still, hardly daring to believe it had actually worked. They'd won. Not through violence or traditional shows of strength, but through intelligence, preparation, and the willingness to use weapons their enemy hadn't seen coming. Marcus was the first to speak. It's over. The war is actually over. For now, Antonio cautioned. DeLuca will honor the agreement because he has to, but he meant what he said. He'll remember this. We'll need to stay vigilant.
Let him remember, Isabella said, standing slowly with Marcus's help. As long as he remembers that we're not to be tested, that underestimating us is fatal. I don't care what else he feels. They left the restaurant through the same side entrance they'd used to enter, moving quickly to the waiting cars.
Isabella's hands were shaking slightly now that the adrenaline was fading, and she pressed them against her belly to steady herself. The baby kicked in response, strong and insistent, as if celebrating the victory. On the drive back to the mansion, Marcus reached over and took Isabella's hand. I owe you an apology. For what? For underestimating you, for all these years, for thinking you were just... He trailed off, searching for words. For not seeing who you really were. You saw what I showed you. I chose to be underestimated. It served my purposes. Still, I should have looked deeper, should have paid attention. He squeezed her hand. You saved us. You ended a war without bloodshed. That's not something I could have done. You would have found a different way, a more direct one. That would have cost more lives, left us weaker. Your way was better, even if it terrified me watching you walk into that room pregnant and vulnerable. I was never vulnerable, Isabella said quietly. I was exactly where I needed to be, doing exactly what needed to be done. That's the opposite of vulnerable. They rode the rest of the way in silence, and when they finally reached the mansion, Isabella felt exhaustion crash over her like a wave. She'd been running on adrenaline and determination for so long that now, with the immediate crisis resolved, her body was demanding rest. Maria was waiting in the entrance hall, her face anxious until she saw them both safe and whole. How did it go? It's over, Marcus said. The war is over. Maria's eyes filled with tears of relief, and she crossed herself quickly. Thank all the saints. I'll prepare a celebration dinner. Just something simple, Isabella said. I need to rest. Of course, Signora. I'll have soup sent to your room. Isabella made her way upstairs, each step requiring more effort than it should. She was 7 months pregnant, had just negotiated an end to a war with one of the most dangerous men in Italy, and her body was finally insisting that she acknowledge her limits. She was almost to her room when a sharp pain lanced through her abdomen, strong enough to make her gasp and grab the wall for support. No, not now. It was too early. Another pain followed, and Isabella felt wetness between her legs. Either her water had broken or something was very, very wrong. Marcus, she called out, trying to keep the panic from her voice. Marcus, I need help. She heard running footsteps, saw him appear at the top of the stairs, his face going pale as he saw her doubled over. The baby, she managed. Something's wrong with the baby. Marcus caught Isabella before she could fall, his arms strong and steady even as fear flooded his face. Maria, he shouted, his voice echoing through the mansion. Call Dr. Russo, now! The pain came in waves, each one stronger than the last, and Isabella tried to breathe through it the way she'd read about in the pregnancy books she'd studied in secret. Too early. The baby was coming too early. 7 months wasn't enough. Babies born at 7 months could survive, but they needed hospitals, incubators, specialized care. It's going to be all right, Marcus said, though his voice shook. He lifted her carefully, carrying her to the bedroom with a gentleness she'd never experienced from him before. You're going to be fine. The baby's going to be fine. Isabella wanted to believe him, but another contraction hit and she couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only grip his shirt and try not to scream. When it passed, she gasped out, The doctor I placed months ago, in case something happened. Marcus laid her on the bed, his hands shaking as he arranged pillows behind her. What doctor? What are you talking about? Dr. Elena Marchetti, private obstetrician. I hired her 3 months ago, paid her to be on call, to be ready if there was ever an emergency. Isabella's breath came in short bursts. She has a medical kit here, in the mansion, hidden in the East Wing storage room. Blue medical case. Everything we need. Why didn't you tell me? Because I planned for everything, Marcus, even this. Another contraction seized her, and this time she did scream, the sound tearing from her throat before she could stop it. Maria burst into the room, her face pale. Dr. Russo is on his way, but he's across the city. It'll be at least 40 minutes. We don't have 40 minutes, Marcus said. Isabella hired another doctor, Dr. Elena Marchetti. Find her number in Isabella's phone. Call her, tell her to get here immediately. And send someone to the East Wing storage room for a blue medical case. Maria nodded and rushed out. Isabella tried to focus through the pain, tried to maintain the control that had carried her through everything else. But control was slipping away, replaced by something primal and terrifying. Her body was doing what it needed to do, and she was just along for the ride. "I'm scared," she whispered, the admission costing her something she couldn't name. Marcus took her hand, pressing it between both of his. "I know, but you're the strongest person I've ever met. If anyone can get through this, it's you. The baby's too small, too early. Then we'll make sure they have everything they need, whatever it takes, whatever it costs." His eyes were fierce, determined. "You saved my empire, Isabella. Now let me save our child." Antonio appeared in the doorway, the blue medical case in his hands. "Found it. Dr. Marchetti is 10 minutes out. She was already on her way when we called, said she'd been monitoring the situation and had a feeling she'd be needed." Isabella felt a wave of gratitude for her own paranoia, for the careful planning that had seemed excessive at the time, but now might save her baby's life. She'd pay Dr. Marchetti a fortune to be available, to keep a full medical kit on the property, to be prepared for exactly this scenario. The doctor had thought Isabella was being overly cautious, but she'd taken the money and made the preparations anyway. Now those preparations were the difference between hope and disaster. Another contraction hit, longer and stronger than before, and Isabella felt something shift inside her. The pressure was enormous, unbearable, her body insisting that the baby was coming whether anyone was ready or not. "I need to push," she gasped. "Not yet," Marcus said, though he looked terrified. "Wait for the doctor." "I can't." The urge was overwhelming, instinctive, impossible to resist. Isabella's body was taking over, doing what millions of years of evolution had designed it to do. Doctor Marchetti arrived like a small, efficient storm, a woman in her 50s with iron-gray hair and the kind of calm competence that came from delivering babies in every imaginable circumstance. She assessed the situation in seconds, her hands already moving to wash and prepare. "How far apart are the contractions?" she asked, her voice steady and professional. "Maybe 2 minutes," Marcus said. "They're getting closer." "And her water broke?" "About 15 minutes ago." Doctor Marchetti nodded, moving to examine Isabella with practiced efficiency. "You're fully dilated. This baby is coming now, whether we're ready or not. But that's all right. We are ready. Aren't we, Isabella?" Isabella managed a weak nod, grateful beyond words that this woman was here, that her planning had worked, that she wasn't facing this alone or unprepared. "I need everyone out except the father," Dr. Marchetti said. "Maria, I'll need hot water, clean towels, and keep Doctor Russo on standby in case there are complications. But for now, this is just a birth. Early, yes, but manageable." Maria and Antonio left quickly, and Dr. Marchetti began setting up her equipment with the kind of efficiency that spoke of decades of experience. She opened the blue medical case, pulling out instruments, medications, monitoring devices. Everything Isabella had insisted she prepare, everything that had seemed paranoid and excessive, now laid out and ready. "On the next contraction, I need you to push," Dr. Marchetti said. "Hard as you can. Your baby wants to meet you, and we're going to make that happen." The next contraction came, and Isabella pushed, gripping Marcus's hand so hard she felt his bones shift. The pain was beyond anything she'd imagined, but underneath it was something else. Purpose. Determination. The same steel that had carried her through political wars and economic battles, now focused entirely on bringing her child safely into the world. "Good," Dr. Marchetti said. "Again. Push." Isabella pushed again and again, losing track of time and everything except the rhythm of contractions and the doctor's calm instructions. Marcus stayed beside her, his hand steady in hers, his voice murmuring encouragement, even though his face was white with fear. "I can see the head, Doctor," Marchetti said. "One more big push, Isabella. One more and your baby is here." Isabella gathered every ounce of strength she had left, every bit of will and determination that had carried her through 7 months of pregnancy and psychological warfare. She pushed with everything she had, felt something give way, heard a sound that stopped her heart. Silence. The baby wasn't crying. Isabella couldn't finish the question, couldn't breathe, couldn't think past the terrible silence where there should have been sound. Dr. Marchetti was moving quickly, efficiently, her hands working over the tiny form. Isabella caught a glimpse of impossibly small limbs, skin that looked too fragile to be real. The baby was so small, so quiet. Then, like a miracle, a thin wail split the air. "It's a boy," Dr. Marchetti said, her voice warm with relief. Small, but breathing on his own. Good color, good reflexes. She was cleaning him quickly, wrapping him in warming blankets. "He's going to need monitoring, and we should get him to a hospital for observation, but he's alive and fighting, just like his mother." Isabella felt tears streaming down her face, though she couldn't remember starting to cry. A son. She had a son, and he was alive. "Doctor." Marchetti placed the tiny bundle in Isabella's arms, and Isabella looked down at the smallest, most perfect thing she'd ever seen. He was red-faced and wrinkled, his eyes squeezed shut against the bright lights, his tiny fists waving in what looked like indignation at being pulled from his warm, dark haven. "He's beautiful," Marcus whispered, his own eyes wet. "He's perfect." "He's early," Dr. Marchetti cautioned. "We need to keep him warm, monitor his breathing and heart rate. I've already called for a neonatal transport team. They'll be here within the hour to take him to the hospital's NICU for proper care." "But he's okay?" Isabella asked, unable to look away from her son's face. "He's going to survive? His lungs sound good, his reflexes are strong, and he's maintaining his own body temperature better than expected for his gestational age. Those are all excellent signs. But he'll need support, probably for several weeks. Premature babies are fighters, Isabella, and this one already has the best possible advantage. What's that? He has you as his mother. And if you could outmaneuver Luca DeLuca while 7 months pregnant, I have no doubt this little warrior has the genetics to survive anything." Isabella looked up sharply. "You know about that?" Dr. Marchetti smiled faintly. "I know who you are, who your husband is, what world you live in. When you hired me, I did my research. I needed to understand what kind of situations I might be walking into. The fact that you went into early labor within hours of ending a war tells me this little one has a sense of timing as dramatic as his parents." The baby made a small sound, something between a whimper and a sigh, and Isabella felt her heart contract with a love so fierce it was almost painful. This tiny person, this fragile life, was hers to protect, hers to raise, hers to teach how to survive in a world that would always be dangerous, always be uncertain. But first he needed to survive the next few hours, the next few days, the critical early weeks that would determine whether he thrived or struggled. "What do we need to do?" Marcus asked, his hand gentle on the baby's head. "Whatever it takes, whatever it costs, tell us. Right now, skin-to-skin contact is important. Isabella, open your shirt. We want him against your chest. It helps regulate his temperature and heart rate." Dr. Marchetti helped Isabella arrange the baby against her bare skin, covering them both with warm blankets. "There, just like that. You're doing perfectly." Isabella felt the baby's tiny body against hers, his heartbeat fluttering like a bird's wing. He was so small, so vulnerable. The idea that she'd been waging war while carrying this fragile life inside her seemed insane in retrospect. What if the stress had harmed him? What if her decisions, her risks, had damaged her son before he was even born? "Stop," Dr. Marchetti said, as if reading her thoughts. "I can see you spiraling into guilt and what-ifs. Don't. You did what you had to do to protect your family, and you did it while keeping yourself and this baby as safe as possible. The fact that he's here, breathing, fighting, proves you made the right choices. But he's early. If I'd been less stressed..." Babies come early for 1,000 reasons. Stress is one factor, but so is genetics, so is chance, so is simply the unpredictability of pregnancy. You can't control everything, Isabella, and trying to will only drive you mad. The words hit harder than they should have, perhaps because they were true. Isabella had spent months controlling every variable she could, planning for every contingency, trying to create perfect safety through perfect strategy. But some things couldn't be controlled. Some things just happened, and all you could do was respond as best you could. The neonatal transport team arrived exactly when promised. Efficient professionals with specialized equipment and years of experience. They examined the baby carefully, their faces serious but not alarmed. He's doing well for 30 weeks gestation, the lead paramedic said. But we want to get him to the NICU for monitoring and support. Mom, you'll need to come too. You've just given birth, and we need to make sure you're stable as well. Isabella looked at Marcus. The family, the organization, someone needs to... Antonio will handle it, Marcus interrupted firmly. I'm coming with you, both of you. Nothing else matters right now. They transported Isabella and the baby in the same ambulance, Marcus following in a separate car with Antonio and enough security to guard a small country. Isabella kept her hand on the baby's incubator the whole way, watching the monitors that tracked his breathing, his heart rate, his oxygen levels. Every beep and flash of light felt like both reassurance and threat. At the hospital, they were swept into the NICU, a world of beeping machines and bright lights and impossibly tiny babies in plastic boxes. The nurses were kind but efficient, taking the baby to examine him more thoroughly while a doctor checked Isabella's condition. You'll need to stay overnight for observation, the obstetrician told her. But you came through the delivery well. No significant tearing, minimal blood loss. Your body handled the early labor remarkably well. When can I see him? Isabella asked. Once we've finished the initial assessment, probably another hour or so. Then you can do more skin-to-skin contact. Maybe try nursing if he's ready. Premature babies sometimes have trouble with that, but we'll see. The hour felt like a year. Isabella lay in a hospital bed, cleaned up and changed into a hospital gown, waiting for news about her son. Marcus sat beside her, his hand never leaving hers, his face cycling through emotions she'd never seen him display before. Fear, love, wonder, vulnerability. Finally, a neonatologist came to find them, a young woman with kind eyes and a reassuring smile. Your son is doing better than expected. His lungs are strong, he's maintaining his temperature well, and his reflexes are all appropriate. We're going to keep him on a feeding tube for now and monitor his breathing, but he's stable. You can see him whenever you're ready. They wheeled Isabella to the NICU in a wheelchair despite her protests that she could walk. When she saw her son again, he was in an incubator, wires and tubes attached to his tiny body, monitors tracking every vital sign. But his eyes were open now, dark and unfocused, looking around at this strange new world he'd entered too soon. He's beautiful, a nurse said, helping Isabella position her hands through the ports in the incubator so she could touch him. Have you chosen a name? Isabella looked at Marcus. They'd discussed names over the months, had narrowed it down to a few options. But now, looking at this tiny fighter who'd survived being born too early in the middle of a war, only one name felt right.
Leonardo, she said softly, after Marcus's father, Leonardo Belano. Marcus's breath caught. His father had died when Marcus was young, had been a legendary figure in their world, respected and feared in equal measure. Naming their son after him was both an honor and a burden, a legacy that would follow the boy for his entire life. Are you sure? Marcus asked. He's a fighter, like his grandfather, like his father, like he'll need to be. Isabella stroked her son's impossibly small hand with one finger. Leonardo, our little lion. The baby's fingers curled around hers, the grip weak but present. Isabella felt tears sting her eyes again, felt the weight of everything that had led to this moment. The months of planning and fear, the war with DeLuca, the risks she'd taken, the gambles that had paid off. All of it had been leading here, to this tiny hand holding hers, to this fragile life that needed her protection more than anything or anyone ever had. Over the next 3 days, Isabella barely left the NICU. She slept in a chair beside Leonardo's incubator, waking every few hours to help the nurses with his care, to hold him skin to skin, to talk to him in soft whispers about the world he'd entered and the family that would protect him. Marcus brought her food, fresh clothes, updates from the outside world that seemed increasingly distant and irrelevant. DeLuca was honoring their agreement. The organization was stable. The other families had taken note of how the war ended and were reevaluating their own positions. But Isabella found she didn't care about any of it. All her strategic planning, all her careful manipulation, all the intelligence that had carried her through the war, none of it mattered next to making sure Leonardo gained weight, maintained his oxygen levels, learned to feed on his own. On the 4th day, the neonatologist gave them cautiously optimistic news. He's doing exceptionally well, better than most babies born at his gestational age.
If he continues improving at this rate, we might be able to take him off some of the support equipment sooner than expected. How much sooner? Isabella asked. Hard to say definitively, but maybe 2 weeks instead of 4 or 6. He's a strong little guy. Antonio came to visit that afternoon, bringing flowers and looking uncomfortable in the sterile hospital environment. He stood beside the incubator, staring at Leonardo with an expression Isabella couldn't quite read. He's tiny, Antonio said finally. He's a fighter, Isabella replied. Like his mother. Antonio looked at her. The organization is asking about you, when you'll be back, what the plan is moving forward. The plan is keeping my son alive. Everything else is secondary. I told them that. But there are still decisions that need to be made. Territory assignments now that DeLuca has stepped back. New agreements with the Moretti family. The usual complications. Then Marcus makes those decisions. Or you do. I trust your judgment, Antonio. The old man looked surprised. You're really stepping back? From day-to-day operations? Yes. I'll still be available for strategy, for the big decisions, but I'm not going back to managing everything from the shadows. Not right now. Isabella looked at her son, watching his chest rise and fall with each tiny breath. This is what matters. Making sure he survives. Making sure he grows up strong and healthy and safe. And when he's older, when he needs to learn about the family business, then we'll teach him, both Marcus and I. We'll teach him to be smart and strong, to value intelligence over violence, to understand that real power comes from knowing things other people don't. Isabella smiled faintly. But first he needs to learn how to breathe without help, how to eat, how to exist in this world. The rest can wait. Antonio nodded slowly. You've changed. The war changed you. No, the war revealed me. I was always this person. I just didn't have a reason to show it before. And now? Now I have the best reason in the world. Isabella touched the incubator gently. I have someone who needs me to be exactly who I am. No hiding, no pretending. Just strength and love and whatever else it takes to keep him safe. 2 weeks later, the doctors cleared Leonardo to leave the NICU. He was still small, still needed careful monitoring, but he was breathing on his own, feeding well, and gaining weight steadily. The day they brought him home to the mansion, Isabella felt like she was carrying the most precious cargo in the world. Maria had prepared everything perfectly. A nursery decorated in soft blues and whites, equipped with every possible device for monitoring an infant's health. A comfortable chair for late-night feedings. Blackout curtains for daytime sleep. Everything Isabella had requested and things she hadn't thought of. Welcome home, little Leonardo, Maria said, tears in her eyes as she looked at the baby. This house has been waiting for you. That first night, Isabella sat in the nursery with Leonardo sleeping in her arms, marveling at how something so small could have changed everything so completely. She'd spent months building strategies, fighting wars, outmaneuvering dangerous men. But holding her son, watching him sleep peacefully, feeling the weight of his tiny body against her chest, this was power. Real power. The kind that didn't come from control or manipulation or intelligence. The kind that came from love. Marcus found her there near midnight, unable to sleep, still watching their son breathe. You should rest, he said softly. I will. Soon. Isabella looked up at him. Did you ever imagine this? When you married me? That we'd end up here? No, I married you because you were suitable, quiet, from a good family. I thought you'd be easy to manage, easy to predict. He sat down beside her, his eyes on Leonardo. I was wrong about everything. Does that bother you? It should. I should be angry that you weren't what I thought, that you had all this intelligence and strength hidden away, but I'm not angry. He paused, searching for words. I'm grateful. You saved us. You ended a war. You gave me a son. And you did it all while I was too blind to see what you really were. And what am I? Marcus looked at her, really looked at her, in a way he never had before. You're the most dangerous woman in Italy, and the best thing that ever happened to me. Isabella felt something shift in her chest, some wall that had been standing between them for their entire marriage finally beginning to crack. What happens now? With us? I don't know, but I'd like to find out. He reached over, touching Leonardo's head gently. I'd like to be the kind of husband you deserve, the kind of father he deserves. Not perfect, but trying. Actually trying instead of just assuming I already know everything. That's all I ever wanted, Isabella said quietly. For you to see me, to try, to be a partner instead of just a boss. Then that's what I'll be, starting now. Leonardo stirred in Isabella's arms, making small sounds that might have been distress or might have been dreams. Isabella rocked him gently, and he settled back into sleep, his tiny face peaceful. Over the following weeks, a new rhythm established itself. Leonardo grew stronger day by day, exceeding every milestone the doctors set. Isabella split her time between caring for him and carefully re-entering the world of family business, but now on her own terms. When she attended meetings, she brought her authority openly instead of hiding it. When she made decisions, Marcus listened and deferred to her judgment in areas where her intelligence had proven superior to his instincts. The other families noticed. The wives and mothers Isabella had cultivated relationships with began treating her differently, with a respect that went beyond politeness. They understood what she'd done, how she'd ended a war without bloodshed, how she'd outmaneuvered Luca de Luca while 7 months pregnant. She'd proven that intelligence and patience could be just as powerful as violence and intimidation. De Luca himself kept his distance, operating within the restrictions they'd imposed, rebuilding his organization from a subordinate position. Isabella received reports about him occasionally, monitoring to make sure he honored their agreement. He did, though she knew he resented every moment of it. But resentment without action was just emotion, and emotion couldn't hurt her as long as De Luca stayed in line. 3 months after Leonardo's birth, Isabella was in her study reviewing territory agreements when Antonio knocked on the door. "Come in," she said, not looking up from the documents. "There's someone here to see you, Signora. She says it's important." Isabella looked up. "Who?" "Elena Messina." Isabella felt a flicker of surprise. She'd arranged Elena's disappearance, had made sure the woman was safe, and settled in her new life far from Naples. For her to come back, to risk being seen, meant something significant had happened. "Send her in." Elena looked different. Healthier, happier, wearing clothes that fit properly, and didn't look worn from overuse. But her eyes were sad as she sat down across from Isabella. "I'm sorry to come back," Elena said. "I know the rules. I know I'm supposed to stay away. But I needed to tell you something, needed to thank you properly." "Thank me for what?" "For giving me a life, a real life. I have a job now, a nice apartment, friends who don't know anything about my past. I'm safe, happy. And it's because you kept your promise, even though my brother—" She trailed off, swallowing hard. "Even though he didn't survive." Isabella had received the confirmation 2 months ago. Carlo's body had been found in a river outside Naples, bearing signs of extensive torture. De Luca had extracted everything he could from the man before disposing of him. It had been brutal and ugly, but it had also been expected. Carlo had known the risks. "I'm sorry about your brother," Isabella said quietly. "He made his choices. Bad ones, mostly. But at the end, he tried to do the right thing, and you honored that. You saved me like you promised. That means something." Elena pulled an envelope from her purse. "I brought you this. It was in Carlo's things, delivered to me after they found him. He must have written it before everything happened, before they took him." Isabella opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper, covered in Carlo's cramped handwriting. "Signora Bellano, if you're reading this, I'm probably dead. I knew the risks when I agreed to work with you. I knew De Luca would eventually figure out what I was doing, but I did it anyway because you gave me something I never had before. Hope that my sister might survive all this. That one person I loved might make it out intact. I want you to know that everything I told you was true. Every piece of information I passed along was accurate. I never lied to you, never tried to play both sides. I owed you that much for trying to save Elena. I also want you to know that what you're doing, the way you're fighting this war, it's the right way. Smarter than anything Marcus or any of the other bosses would have thought of. You're going to win because you see things they don't see. You understand that fear and intelligence are more powerful than guns. Take care of your baby. Raise him to be smart like you, Not just strong like his father. This world needs more people who think before they shoot. Carlo Messina. Isabella folded the letter carefully, feeling an unexpected weight of grief for a man she'd barely known. Carlo had been a traitor who'd tried to do the right thing too late. He'd paid for his mistakes with his life, but he'd also saved his sister and helped end a war. That had to count for something. "Thank you for bringing this," she said to Elena. "He thought highly of you, at the end. Said you were the only one in this whole world who actually kept their promises." Elena stood. "I should go. I just wanted you to know that what you did mattered, that the promise you made, the life you gave me, it means everything. Stay safe, Elena. Stay away from Naples. Don't come back." "I won't. This is goodbye. For real this time." Elena paused at the door. "But if you ever need anything, if there's ever any way I can repay what you've done, find me. I'll come." After she left, Isabella sat alone with Carlo's letter, thinking about choices and consequences, about the price of survival in their world. She'd used Carlo, had put him in danger, had known he might die for the information he provided. But she'd also given his sister a future, had honored her promise even when Carlo was no longer alive to hold her to it. That mattered. In a world built on violence and betrayal, keeping promises mattered. A cry from the nursery pulled Isabella from her thoughts. Leonardo was awake, demanding attention with the insistence only a baby could muster. Isabella went to him, lifting him from his crib, marveling as she always did at how much he'd grown in just 3 months.
"Hello, little lion," she murmured, settling into the chair to feed him. "You're getting so big, so strong." Leonardo latched on hungrily, his dark eyes staring up at her with an intensity that reminded her of Marcus. But there was something else there, too, something that might have been her own careful observation, her own intelligence beginning to show through. "You're going to grow up in a complicated world," she told him softly, "with a complicated family. But you'll also grow up safe,
Protected, loved, because everything I did, every risk I took, every war I fought, it was all for you, to make sure you had a chance to be whoever you want to be." Marcus appeared in the doorway, watching them with an expression that had become familiar over the past months. Love mixed with wonder, as if he still couldn't quite believe this was his life now. "Antonio just told me about Elena's visit," he said. "She brought a letter from Carlo, a last message."
"What did it say?"
"That he hoped we'd win, that we should raise our son to be smart instead of just strong. That promises matter." Isabella looked down at Leonardo, watching him feed contentedly. He was right, about all of it. Marcus came to sit beside them, his hand resting on Leonardo's back. "Do you have any regrets? About how things went? The choices you made?" Isabella thought about it carefully, reviewing the past months in her mind. The fear, the stress, the dangerous gambles that could have gone wrong in 100 different ways. The war that could have cost them everything. The early birth that could have cost her son's life. "No," she said finally. "I don't regret anything, because all of it, every choice, every risk, every moment of fear, it led here, to this, to us being alive and together and safe. That's not something to regret. That's something to protect."
"And the organization?"
"Do you want to step back permanently? Focus only on Leonardo?"
"I want balance. I want to be Leonardo's mother, but I also want to use my mind for more than just nursery schedules and feeding times. I want to continue building something that will last, that will protect our family for generations." Isabella met Marcus's eyes.
"But I want to do it as your partner, not your decoration, not your shadow, your actual partner. That's what you've been all along. I was just too stupid to see it."
"You saw it eventually. That's what matters." Leonardo finished feeding and promptly fell asleep, milk-drunk and peaceful. Isabella held him a moment longer, breathing in his baby smell, feeling his weight against her chest. This was power, she thought again, real, undeniable power. The power to create life, to protect it, to shape it into something strong and good. All the strategy and manipulation in the world couldn't compare to this.
6 months after Leonardo's birth, Isabella stood in the same study where she'd first laid divorce papers on Marcus's desk, where she'd begun the quiet war that had changed everything. But now she wasn't alone. Marcus stood beside her, Antonio across from them, And between them all was a new agreement. Not divorce papers this time, but something different. A formal partnership document that restructured the organization's leadership. Marcus would continue handling day-to-day operations and external relations. Isabella would manage strategy, intelligence, and the careful cultivation of alliances. Together, they would make the major decisions, neither one subordinate to the other. It was revolutionary for their world. Scandalous, even. Women didn't hold formal power in these organizations. They influenced from the shadows, worked through their husbands, operated invisibly. But Isabella Bellano had never been very good at following rules she didn't agree with. This will cause talk, Antonio warned. The other families will see it as weakness, as Marcus losing control. Let them see it however they want, Marcus said. They can think I'm weak or controlled or whatever narrative makes them comfortable. Meanwhile, we'll be stronger than ever because we're using all our resources instead of pretending half of them don't exist. And when they test us, when someone decides to push boundaries, Isabella smiled, then they'll learn the same lesson DeLuca learned, that underestimating us is the last mistake they'll ever make. Antonio looked at the partnership agreement, then at Isabella, then at Marcus. Finally, he nodded. All right, I'm with you. Both of you. Whatever comes next. What came next was a new era for the Bellano family. Isabella's intelligence network expanded, feeding information that prevented conflicts before they started. Her economic strategies generated wealth that didn't rely on violence. Her diplomatic connections with other families' wives and mothers created alliances that traditional methods would have missed. Marcus learned to trust her judgment, to defer to her expertise in areas where she excelled, to see their marriage as a partnership instead of a hierarchy. It wasn't always easy. Old habits and assumptions died hard, but they worked at it, both of them, building something new from the ruins of what their marriage had been. And Leonardo grew, thriving in ways that defied the dire predictions that had surrounded his early birth. At 1 year old, he was healthy, curious, already showing signs of the intelligence he'd inherited from both parents. Isabella watched him explore his world with fearless determination and thought about the future she'd fought so hard to secure. On Leonardo's first birthday, the mansion filled with family and allies, a celebration that was both personal and political. Isabella moved through the crowd with her son on her hip, accepting congratulations, making small talk, maintaining the relationships that kept their world stable. Luca de Luca sent a gift, which was either diplomatic or a subtle threat. Isabella couldn't quite decide. An antique silver rattle, expensive and elegant, with a note that read simply, "For the little lion, may he grow as strong as his mother." Marcus had wanted to refuse it, to send it back as an insult, but Isabella had kept it, understanding the message underneath the message. De Luca was acknowledging her power, paying respect to the woman who'd defeated him. That was more valuable than any snub could be. That evening, after the guests had left and Leonardo was asleep, Isabella stood in the study holding the divorce papers she'd presented to Marcus more than a year ago. The papers that had started everything. The papers Marcus had signed without reading, giving her control of assets he didn't even realize he was losing. She fed them into the fireplace, watching the pages curl and blacken and turn to ash. She didn't need them anymore. Didn't need the leverage or the insurance policy or the escape route, because what she'd built with Marcus over the past year was stronger than any legal document. It was a real partnership, forged through crisis and tested by fire, based on mutual respect instead of fear or dependence. "What are you doing?" Marcus asked from the doorway. "Burning the past," Isabella replied. "We don't need it anymore." He came to stand beside her, watching the last of the papers turn to ash. "You kept those all this time." "As insurance, in case things went wrong, in case I needed leverage or protection." She turned to face him. "But I don't need them now. We're past that." "What do we need?" Isabella thought about the question, about everything they'd been through and everything still to come. "We need each other. We need Leonardo. We need to keep building what we've started. That's enough." Marcus pulled her close, his arms strong and steady around her. "More than enough. It's everything." They stood together in the fireplace's glow, watching the embers fade, and Isabella felt something she'd never expected to feel in this marriage. Peace. Not the absence of danger or challenge or conflict, because those would always be present in their world, but peace with her choices, her life, her future. She'd started as the quiet woman everyone underestimated. She'd become the strategist who won wars without firing a shot, and now she was simply Isabella Bolano, mother and partner, and power in her own right, building a legacy that would protect her son and her family for generations to come. The long game was never Marcus's, she'd told DeLuca. It was hers, and she'd won it completely. Not by leaving or destroying or escaping, but by staying and fighting and transforming everything from the inside out. By being patient when everyone else was reactive. By being smart when everyone else relied on strength. By being exactly who she'd always been, hidden in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to show the world what she was capable of. The quiet woman they had all underestimated had rewritten the rules of their world, and in doing so, she'd created something new, something better, something that might actually last. Leonardo cried out in his sleep, a small sound that carried down the hall. Isabella moved immediately, Marcus following, both of them responding to their son's need with the kind of unity that came from real partnership. In the nursery, Isabella lifted Leonardo from his crib, soothing him with gentle words and familiar touch. He settled immediately, recognizing his mother's voice, her scent, her presence. "You're safe," she whispered, rocking him gently. "You're loved. You're protected. Always." And as she held her son, with her husband beside her and her empire secure around them, Isabella Bolano knew that every risk she'd taken, every battle she'd fought, every moment of fear she'd endured, all of it had been worth it, because she'd won the only war that truly mattered, the war for her family's future. And she'd won it on her own terms, in her own way, proving that quiet strength could be the most powerful force of all. The empire survived, not because of fear or guns or traditional power, but because the quiet woman everyone underestimated had planned for every betrayal, fought every battle, and won every war that mattered. And in the end, that was the only victory worth having.